Good evening, everyone. We are calling to order the Planning and Zoning meeting for June 25th. We begin, as always, with adopting our agenda. Is anyone here with a change, alteration to the agenda? If not, I would look for a motion to adopt.
I'll make a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Second, please.
I'll second it.
Any discussion on that? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. That motion carries unanimously for now, which is 8-0. We then go to the meeting minutes for the regular meeting of May 21st. We did not have a work session in May, so we'll just carry the regular meeting. Once again, if anyone has any changes, I'd like to hear them. Otherwise, a motion to approve those minutes would be in order.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on that? If not, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no, please. That motion is also 8-0 unanimous. We have a few cases this evening carrying a public hearing. Our public hearings come with a few little rules here, and I will go through them right now for you. First of all, we'll tell you how things are going to go, and that is the staff will present the case to us, and they will speak to us, and you'll see the slides up above our head and in those monitors over there showing you what we're seeing on our little monitors as well. After the staff is done, the applicant will then come and speak to us for 10 minutes as the first speaker in our public hearing. Once the applicant is done, any of you who wish to speak for the public hearing may do so. We ask that you come down that side so we can kind of keep an eye on how many are coming in here. Rather than just waiting for folks to pop up, it helps things move along just a little bit more smoothly. When you do come down, you'll have a card over there on the right side. We'd ask you to fill it out and please hand it to the clerk. When you come up to the podium, please, if you will, use the podium on the left, not the one with the computer monitor. I'd like you to use the one that has the 3 little buttons there, and the buttons are your timer. They're going to give you 5 minutes, 4.5 minutes of green, 30 seconds of yellow, and then when it's red, I will wrap you up right away so everyone has the same 5 minutes and we're fair to all people. When there's a lot of folks here, and there might be a bunch of folks here for just one case, I don't really know, but when there's a lot of folks for one particular case, sometimes it's helpful to not have everyone say the same thing, but to have sort of a tag team thing going on where each person makes a different point or whatever. And if anyone wants to say, hey, all those folks who agree with me here would just stand up, go right ahead, but that comes out of your time. We'd ask you to, if you have a giant group and you just want to be represented by one person, that's totally fine as well, but still it's only 5 minutes for that person. One of the most important deals about our public hearings, though, is it is just us hearing you. It's not an interaction. We will not answer any questions from you. In fact, we won't respond whatsoever. We're just here to listen to what you have to say, and you can say pretty much whatever you want for that 5-minute period. When everyone has had their say, then I'll close the public hearing. We'll bring the applicant and the staff back up if we need to ask them any questions, and then we will probably kick a motion around and think about how we're going to address the case, and we'll either come up with a recommendation for approval or for denial. Have I missed anything? If not, we will begin with our very first case of the evening, which is 16 REZ 15. Ms. Grannon's with us. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. For your consideration this evening is a rezoning case, 16 REZ 15. Yes, that is not a typo. This rezoning case is one of the oldest ones we've had on the books. It's been in review and under consideration for almost 2 years. It's for 7.2 acres located at 1623 North Harrison Avenue. Subject property is highlighted here in yellow. It's located south of the Arboretum development and north of Veterans Freedom Park. Here's a zoomed in aerial view. The property is currently vacant. The property is located within a commercial center mixed use designation on Cary's growth framework map. It's currently zoned residential 40, and the applicant has proposed mixed use district. And with that comes a preliminary development plan requirement. When it was first submitted to us back in 2016, the proposal was for 3 hotels and 350 rooms with a maximum of 8 stories. There was also a proposal to remove champion trees, and there was no guarantee of the setback distance to the western property line. This caused some concerns with neighbors. There was a neighborhood meeting on July 6th and on July 13th in 2016. The number one concern was traffic impacts, site access to the property, building heights, and what sort of visual impacts that would have, questions about buffer standards, stormwater management, A number of residents wanted to know if the use was even necessary. Did we need a hotel in that area? And 3 hotels they felt was just too many hotels on that small piece of property. So the applicant modified the plan. They reduced the number of hotels to 2. They reduced the rooms to 252, reduced the building height, and proposed to preserve the champion trees on the property. So with the 2 hotels, one hotel would have 138 rooms and have a maximum of 7 stories, and the second hotel would have 114 rooms and provide the amenities that would be shared, such as meeting space, fitness center, and swimming pool. The preliminary development plan also identified the perimeter buffer adjacent to the neighborhood to the west. An 80-foot type A buffer is required. That has been proposed with one small exception. There's an adjacent property owner who has backyard playground equipment and a fence that encroaches into that buffer area. The subject property owner has granted an easement to that property owner, so the buffer area would be reduced just in that area. And it shows where the champion tree is proposed to be retained. They've proposed an 8% parking reduction and a reduction in spacing for some internal roads. The site is impacted by streams according to the most recent GIS maps, and field determination of those features will be required at the time of the development plan review. I do want to point out, however, and the applicant will speak further to this, that they have entered into a private partnership to address some of the concerns about stormwater management and stream preservation in this area, and an EPA grant has been awarded to study and implement low-impact development at the hotel site. So this is not anything that's part of the zoning conditions, but the applicant did speak to that at the public hearing. According to the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan, there is a future greenway trail in close proximity to the site. The property is located adjacent to North Harrison Avenue, which is a major thoroughfare. And there is also an existing fixed transit route along North Harrison Avenue. At the community feedback at the Town Council public hearing was addressing a number of concerns that were raised at the neighborhood meeting. Number 1 being traffic impacts and what mitigations were being offered. Concern about stormwater, connectivity with roads and with sidewalks. There were 2 citizens who spoke about water pressure, that they were experiencing low water pressure in the area. Our staff did go out and evaluate those situations and reported back that there was not anything with the town system, but that the property owners had plumbing issues with their personal property, so those were addressed. Site access points, building setbacks, and just general aesthetics about how would this site look, how is it going to impact the adjacent property owners. And then following the public hearing, a citizen contacted me and asked for clarification about the 100-foot setback that was proposed for the buildings, and that was listed as a zoning condition. The reason why we're having a second public hearing tonight is the applicant did come back and offer a zoning condition that guaranteed a 250-foot building setback from the western property line. So that was the only change to the zoning conditions, and that warranted the second public hearing. Question that came up, an issue that came up by the applicant and by one party who opposed the rezoning, was the cross-access to the Arboretum property. The Arboretum property is under one ownership. Reedy Creek Investments owns a portion of that site that was part of the original Arboretum property and was later sold to Reedy Creek Investments. And there is a recorded easement to that property, which is shown here. And I also have a copy of the Book of Maps from 2006, which shows that 40-foot access easement that comes across the Arboretum property, crosses over this parking lot, which is owned by Reedy Creek Investments, and then would potentially serve this subject property. There's some disputes going on between Reedy Creek Investments and the applicant about whether or not that easement is applicable. It is a requirement. It's a development plan requirement for connectivity between development plans. So this is something staff is going to be looking for at the time of development if this case is approved. Other concerns that came up were traffic mitigations, those that were raised by the traffic analysis. The applicant is proposing a site driveway, an exclusive southbound right turn lane with 100 feet of storage to the site. They're also proposing right in, right out on the subject property, and then a bulb out opposite Montebello Drive that would help facilitate U-turns for people coming out of the site. There's no traffic signal there, and wanting to turn to the right and make a U-turn, this bulb out in the road would help to facilitate that. That caused a number of people to be concerned, and as a result, there was a continuation of the traffic analysis so that that could be studied and evaluated, and we could see if there were any other alternatives. There were no changes to those zoning conditions. We did look, as you saw, at this access point between the subject property and the property here where the parking lot is that serves the Arboretum. So we identified that it was a recorded easement. We did look at Montebello Drive and saw that while it might be very difficult to make a left turn onto Montebello Drive because there's no traffic signal, there is an alternate way out of the neighborhood. It's 1.2 miles to come up and access a turn signal here along Weston. So there is an alternative way out, even though it's a little bit more inconvenient. We also wanted to point out that the town council asked for more information about the applicant's efforts to get a traffic signal here at the access point to the subject property. And this was a DOT decision that it was not something they wanted to grant because of the close proximity to the existing traffic signal. They were willing, however, to grant something if they could work together with the adjacent property owner to the south. The applicant has addressed that, and there's an attachment in your staff report that describes the efforts that the applicant made to try to reach out to the adjacent property owner and work together to get a signal. Doesn't mean that there won't be a signal someday, but today it's right in, right out only for this site. In our analysis of the Cary Community Plan, staff looked at the work policies and the work chapter, identified a number of things that were applicable, that this would help to address the need for a strong and diverse local economy and provide additional employment opportunities in this area. Safety concerns with the move chapter were a concern. We wanted to see a sure, solution to this, and we wanted to put the adjacent property owners at ease, especially the folks on Montebello Drive who were concerned about how they would get in and out of their neighborhood if this development went in. Any sort of development here at this site is going to be faced with those same challenges, whether it was a townhome community, retail use, or a hotel. Some development is going to go on this site. So these concerns exist regardless of what goes here. It doesn't prevent opportunities for future improvements in the future. And if that cross-access easement is honored and can be implemented, then that's going to help alleviate a little bit of the pressure here. In terms of shape, we looked at the proximity and transitions to adjacent commercial neighborhoods and residential neighborhoods, and those increased setbacks and that buffer without reductions other than that one little backyard area were consistent with both the land development ordinance and the goals of the Cary Community Plan. So staff's recommendation is that by finding that this is consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan, both in terms of the appropriate use, addressing the policies of the work chapter and the shape chapter, our preliminary recommendation is for approval. And at this time, the applicant would like to speak to you, and then following the public hearing, I'll be available for your questions.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. My name is Glenda Topp with Glenda S. Topp and Associates, and I'm here tonight representing the applicant and the property owner, Mr. Joel Williams. Before I get started, I would like to recognize all those people in the audience that are here tonight who will not be speaking that are in favor of the proposed rezoning. If they would stand. Thank you. Staff did a thorough job explaining the proposed rezoning. The request is to rezone approximately 7.2 acres to allow the development of 2 hotels with a total of 252 rooms. As staff pointed out, the reason for the public hearing is that we have increased the 100-foot building setback from the western property line to 250 feet, and this was due to commitments that were made to the adjacent property owners. The rezoning occurred, well, we actually submitted the rezoning application in June of 2016. We have worked diligently to address concerns of staff, council, and property owners. The process created the need for 3 traffic studies, the initial study plus 2 revisions. A tremendous effort was made to address concerns and create a plan that complies with the policies found in the Cary Community Plan. The Beech Tree HOA and the Arboretum have submitted letters of support. We worked with property owners to the rear by lowering the rear building height, reducing the density by 30%, and increasing the Wessex rear landscaping distance. Yes, this process has been lengthy. However, we believe that the current plan is well thought out and addresses the concerns that were raised and clearly complies with the vision for property located within a commercial mixed-use center. What I want to do with my presentation tonight is just hit the policies that we comply with in the Cary Community Plan. As you know, in your staff report, that is something that y'all are to look at and examine, and that's what I'd like to do briefly for you tonight. I'll start Chapter 3, Work. Policy 2, Enhance Locational Appeal to Businesses and Workers. The proposed rezoning provides new employment opportunities in Cary and increases the locational appeal to businesses by providing more choices for lodging for their visitors as well as for in-house training in what has become a burgeoning employment growth center in Cary. In addition to appealing to businesses, it will also provide additional lodging alternatives for families and their guests in this part of Cary. Policy 4, Diversify Cary's economy. The development proposal will expand the hospitality base in Cary, specifically in an area where the use is limited. There will also be additional service employment opportunities. Policy 8, Support the locational needs of new and expanding firms. The subject property is located in close proximity to a major business park and will add to the variety of lodging alternatives that should be available to support the needs of new and expanding businesses not only in Weston but elsewhere in Cary. Chapter 4, Shop. Policy 2, Focus commercial uses within commercial mixed-use destination centers, downtown, and commercial centers. The proposed use focuses a commercial use within a commercial mixed-use center. Policy 3, Support the development of a limited number of destination centers and commercial mixed-use centers. The use proposed is appropriate for this location. The use is adjacent to a walkable retail center. Having lodging at this location will help support the adjacent retail and commercial uses. Chapter 6, Shape. Policy 1, Distribute commercial centers, commercial mixed-use centers, and destination centers across town. The site is an undeveloped parcel and essentially an infill situation and is designated as part of a commercial mixed-use center on North Harrison Avenue near the intersection of I-40. The proposed rezoning and the design and regulatory control provided by the PDP make the site a natural fit for the proposed use. Policy 4, Support and facilitate redevelopment and infill development. This policy specifically states that Cary will support and facilitate redevelopment and infill development, particularly within commercial mixed-use centers. It is in Cary's best interest to utilize and capitalize on existing public infrastructure. This location is served by existing public infrastructure. There are many vacant parcels at this location in Cary. The proposed rezoning provides an excellent transitional use between the existing commercial and multifamily development and the existing residential development. Policy 6, Provide appropriate transition between land uses. The proposed rezoning provides a transition from retail and multifamily uses to the north and the residential uses to the west and south. The proposed buffer between the hotel site and the adjacent single-family residential properties to the west provides an effective visual screen between these uses. The size and scale of the proposed development is appropriate for this location. The Future Growth Framework Map. The subject property is located within an area designated as a commercial mixed-use center on the Future Growth Framework Map. As pointed out in your staff report, staff writes very clearly that the use proposed does meet the intent very clearly of development that is to occur in a mixed-use center. Chapter 7, Move. Based on the three traffic studies that have been performed in the proposed rezoning, we believe the plan before you provides for the safe movement of vehicles and pedestrians. In summary, the proposed rezoning is consistent with the Cary Community Plan and is in compliance with the Future Growth Framework Map. The proposed rezoning classification is suitable for the subject property. The rezoning complies with policies found in the work, shop, shape, and move chapters. Buffers and transitions are important when evaluating a rezoning. The increased buffers and setbacks adjacent to the existing residential neighborhoods provide a visual separation. We have met the test of an appropriate transition. The proposed use is appropriate given the fact that it is underrepresented in this part of Cary. This is particularly important given the location of the subject property near a major office park and the intersection of I-40 and North Harrison Avenue. The proposed rezoning facilitates the development of an infill parcel and preserves and maintains Cary's attractive appearance and quality of development. As I said earlier, in your staff report, it reads that the Planning and Zoning Board should review the zoning request to determine if it is consistent with the imagined Cary Community Plan. The answer to this question is yes. The proposed rezoning is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the board, and we ask for the board's support. And also, there are other members of the team that are here during the discussion to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. The public hearing has been opened for this particular case. Is there anyone who would like to speak to us regarding this rezoning? If you would, you can line up over there. Very much appreciated.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Joel Williams. I'm the owner of the 7.2 acres that you're considering rezoning, and I will not be rehashing everything that your staff has done such an excellent job. And I read that a couple of days ago. There's just a couple of things I may refer you to in there. I've been here in Cary since 1962. And I've owned the property since the mid-70s. And there's been many, many people over the years have tried to find applications for this property. And this is by far, in my mind, head and shoulders above any other use that somebody has proposed. And I always kind of take what I call a Goodyear blimp view, because I'm not as detailed as your staff and things. But when I look at this, you've got the airport, a visitor coming here, and I've seen this town grow from 2,000, I think it's over 160,000 now. So everybody needs a place to stay when they come and visit our town. And so they can, from the airport, to come down 40, turn a right, and it's right there. They stay, they go straight down to Harrison and go to your downtown, they can go to the fountain, they can go to the Arts Center, they can go to Ashworth Drugs and get a hot dog or whatever. But also the beauty of part of this is it's right adjacent to the Arboretum, which has a lot of nice restaurants. And those of us that have traveled a lot of times when you go to a hotel, even though they may have a good restaurant, if you're staying there a while, you like to go out and may not have a car, and you can walk and do something. So I feel that this is just a super, I get excited thinking about it being there, because it's just, that whole area that you guys have planned and zoned is just a real feather in your hat, in my opinion. And it's also a real feather in your hat when I drive downtown Cary and I see people going around the fountain and going to the Arts Center. I mean, believe me, Cary wasn't this way when I moved here in the 60s. It was just, it was Johnson's Barbecue, and people came from Raleigh to eat at Johnson's Barbecue, and it's gone. So I feel this is a great, and I can't begin to tell you, Mr. Daly of Daly 7 and that family, it's a family run, the applicant that's going to be, would potentially be building this, and they would also be managing it. So it's not just like somebody building something and running out of town. So I just think this is a very exciting, and I think, like I said, I don't want to rehash everything that's in your Ms. Grannon. You gave an excellent summary of everything. And I just, if you go to page 12, that's the only one I would remind you of, you'll see that this property falls right in the heart of your, what do you call it, your future growth framework map. So I just think it's a great application, and I'm not going to kill any more of your time. I just hope you support this, and I think it would be the absolute best use I could ever imagine for this piece of property. And I'm knocking on the door at 77 years of age, so I'm hoping to see something go on that property before I leave this planet. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christy Rosas, 108 Waterfall Court, Cary, North Carolina. I live in Silverton subdivision. I lived there since 1996. Here are my key points. Umstead State Park has over 1 million visitors. 2/3 of that goes to the Cary entrance, 1/3 goes to the Raleigh side. If you look on the NC State website, there's a general management plan that was released a year ago, and they have a $2.1 million environmental center proposed at Whispering Pines. So my request is to look at that and to evaluate that with the traffic study. The other key point is that a lot of the lakes in Umstead State Park are basically sediment control devices, and hydrilla has been present in Reedy Creek Lake since 1980. It was the first one in the state to find it. So, and the third point is, I know that you guys are doing a stormwater management plan, and this is a request to look at this site and how the future impacts would affect stormwater in Cary. That's it.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Mike Robbins. I'm the property manager at the Arboretum at Weston. I work for Stoltz Management, which is the management company representing the ownership of Arboretum Cary LLC, who owns the property. I'm here this evening on behalf of the owners to express our support for the proposed rezoning and the hotel project that's been submitted by Daily 7 to be built on the project, the property that's being discussed this evening. We feel very strongly that the ownership of Daily 7 is committed to building a hotel that will complement the existing businesses and residential neighborhoods in the area, just based on the communication that we've had them since they first approached us, soliciting input on our concerns, questions, suggestions, since we're so close to them or where the proposed project would be built. Certainly, the proposed hotel would be extremely beneficial for the shops and restaurants at the Arboretum, especially since it's so close. People would be able to take a nice stroll and walk to the hotel or take a very short drive. Additionally, we feel that it would also be beneficial for other shops and retail restaurants in the surrounding area. So I thank you for allowing me to have the opportunity to speak with you this evening and for allowing us to express our support for the proposed rezoning and the hotel project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Evangelista and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group, here on behalf of Reedy Creek Investments, who owns property in the vicinity of the subject parcel. There we go. Reedy Creek Investments owns this site here, as was noted in the staff's presentation. Reedy Creek Investments also owns the parcel immediately to the south, as well as parcels on the east side of Harrison Avenue. I've got going to send around. Reedy Creek is opposed to the rezoning request primarily because, well, two reasons. One, they don't believe a hotel use in this location is an appropriate use. And second, concerns associated with traffic circulation as a result of the bulb out, the U-turn movement that will be constructed at the intersection of Montebello and Harrison, which I'll talk about momentarily. From a use standpoint, the letter that's going around, there's a handful of attachments to it. One of those is an excerpt from the old Cary Comprehensive Plan. Some of you all recognize this because you've been on the board for long enough to remember it. And that was back when Cary, on a parcel-by-parcel basis, made land use recommendations from a use standpoint. And you can't see it real good because it's a large map, because Cary covers a lot of area, but if you look closely, the parcels in question that are owned by Reedy Creek, as well as the subject property, were designated for medium-density residential. That's how they were land use planned for years, leading up to the adoption of the Cary Community Plan. And I would note that under the Cary Community Plan, medium-density residential would be a supported use in the commercial mixed-use area, that townhomes and single-family dwellings are recognized as an incidental use appropriate in commercial mixed-use centers. And Reedy Creek Investments believes that a medium-density residential proposal on this site is in better keeping with its location. As you all are aware, there's single-family detached homes immediately to the west. There are apartments to the north. The parcel that Reedy Creek owns to the south, while there's no development plan that's been submitted, their anticipation is when that site comes forward, it will develop for residential uses. That's how they have it planned. And so if that were to transpire, locating a much more higher intensity hotel use kind of shoehorned in the middle of essentially residential uses, we don't believe, or Reedy Creek does not believe, is an appropriate use of the land. And again, Reedy Creek's expectations, as guided by the future land use map just before the Cary Community Plan, were molded around the idea that these areas would develop for medium density residential. With respect to traffic, as is noted in the staff report and the staff's presentation, in order to accommodate the limited access this site has, they are proposing a U-turn movement at Montebello and Harrison Avenue. As you all are aware, right now, Harrison Avenue is a 5-lane highway. There's two northbound, 2 southbound, and there's a shared turn lane in the middle. I attended a neighborhood meeting that was hosted by the applicant a couple of months ago, where neighbors expressed concerns associated with how a U-turn movement at this location would impact their ability to get out of their neighborhood. Specifically, as of today, or at least what we heard was, folks are using that turn lane as kind of a suicide lane. You know, in the mornings, they're turning out and they're using that shared turn lane to buy themselves time in order to merge into traffic. With the revised transportation plan that's necessary to accommodate this plan, they lose that suicide lane. It goes away entirely. That becomes a dedicated U-turn lane. And so as a result of that, our client hired a traffic firm to go monitor traffic in the morning and determine to what extent that suicide lane was being used. And their review, the traffic engineer's review, was that a lot of cars are using that suicide lane in order to buy themselves time, in order to merge into traffic. And further, there was a handful of instances where folks had near accidents because it's just tough. There's a lot of traffic, as you all know. And so we have concerns about health, safety, and welfare associated with that if this comes to transpire. Also, I want to note, I've got the traffic engineer that the town hired has indicated that within 800 feet of the bulb out, future curb cuts would be limited. And so this map that I've prepared shows all of the properties that would be, at least per DOT's policy, would be prohibited from having access drives in the future. So with that, I see my time has run out, and you have this information in front of you, so appreciate your time.
Thank you. May we have our next speaker, please?
Good evening, council members. I'm Selma McIntyre. I'm here with my husband, Ken. We live at 1618 North Harrison Avenue. We bought this land way back in the late 60s from Mr. Roy McGee, and we built and moved there in 1974, which was 44 years ago. At the time we bought it, it was a gravel road, and it was still Reedy Creek Road. In fact, when we moved there in 74, it was still called Reedy Creek Road. And since, after we moved, of course, it became North Harrison Avenue, which was a main artery from 40 into Cary. So we've seen all kinds of changes in the 44 years that we have been there. Certainly, the amount of traffic that's on that road. So I am speaking on the impact of the traffic, as the previous person spoke also, because to make a left-hand turn at certain times out of our driveway, we do have to wait a couple of minutes, or as he said, pull out in the suicide lane and just wait till you can get over. So I feel like that this will certainly impact the traffic so much more. SAS, according to an article in the paper Sunday, has approximately 6,000 workers. They have 2 entrances into their campus. One which is a little bit north of where they are proposing to put this U-turn. So the traffic coming from 40 of the SAS workers that choose that particular entrance, they're in this same lane that the people, the patrons from the hotels, would be trying to get into to make their U-turn. So it's already a suicide lane. And to imagine adding more people trying to get up North Harrison, and especially to make a U-turn, is just impossible to think about. So there's also a fire station a couple of blocks further up the road. And of course, there are fire trucks and emergency vehicles that are also using this road. So from our experience living right there in the area, we would be right there where they proposed to put the U-turn is approximately maybe at the slight end of our property. So we want to say from our experience living there and see all of the changes that have happened in 44 years, that we do not feel the proposal of making a U-turn and bulb out at this point on North Harrison is a safe or suitable solution.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Oliver, and I live at 200 Sedgemore Drive, which is right on one of those little red dots where the developer proposes all of the new traffic go by. I bought my house inside a neighborhood so that I was not on a busy street, so that I did not have cars whizzing by, and the thought now that all of the traffic from my neighborhood, as well as anybody else who wants to cut through, or people from the hotel who put it in Waze or Google Maps and sees that's the best way to go, are now going to be going past our house several times a day. The increased traffic is not desirable at all. Also, for your people who have not been on Harrison in the morning, please come, and come back when Cary Academy's in session as well, because the nice lady who spoke before me said all the SAS people turn in, as well as all of the Cary Academy students are turning in there. And if you look on Harrison, you'll notice that the chicken lane, suicide lane, whatever the proper term is, has been restriped recently because there were so many concerns prior as well And there is now a specific left turn down to Montebello because there was so much traffic coming up the other way already turning in to Research Drive. So I'm just here to oppose the additional traffic, especially past my house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Norden. I live in Wessex, and as you can see from my shirt, I also work at SAS. I either go into the SAS campus each and every day by Research Drive or leave by Research Drive, either by car or on bicycle each and every day of the work week. And I can tell you that increasingly it's become a dangerous intersection to pass, whether it be by car or particularly on bike or as a pedestrian. The U-turn that is proposed just north of that location is going to simply exacerbate a problem of the amount of traffic that's coming up from South Cary to I-40. And the neighborhoods that exit out just south of Research Drive that are making that left-hand turn already into the, as it's been termed here this evening, suicide lane, is just one example of where traffic is already overcrowded in that section. I believe one of the traffic studies that was done already rated these areas as either a D or an F. If you add a high-density property such as the one that's proposed, that's only going to ensure that this area, without the ability to expand its capacity for traffic, will only become an F without any uncertainty at all. Furthermore, what I would say is that as you go north on Harrison and you pass that entrance, you've already got a significant problem at the traffic light at Weston, where you've already got a population of drivers that are making a U-turn to gain entrance in to the Arboretum. So you've got several traffic problems that represent safety problems already in existence, and this property is only going to exacerbate that problem significantly. It's currently zoned as medium-density residential. It's a perfectly good and appropriate use for that property, and the recommendation from a resident and a nearby worker would be to not approve this property as it's proposed. So thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. May I have our next speaker, please?
Hi, my name is Sarah Wajkowski. I am an extension engineer with NC State, and I'm actually here to provide some additional details about the EPA grant that was mentioned in the application. This EPA grant was awarded through the North Carolina Division of Water Resources, and we, NC State, partnered with Daily 7 to apply for this grant to reduce the additional degradation of Black Creek and Beech Tree tributary with the development of this property. The purpose of this grant is to make sure that runoff leaving the site is no more than 10% of what it was pre-developed. This actually meets the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality's definition for low impact development, or LID. Because of where the property is situated, all of the stormwater will actually go to Black Creek and the Beech Tree tributary, not to Olmsted Park. So to help prevent this to avoid degradation, we are actually going to promote and implement stormwater practices that treat runoff through infiltration and evaporation. And what this does is this actually prevents the pollutants and reduces the amount of runoff that is discharged to this creek. And low impact development has been shown to actually improve creek health. To actually make sure that this project meets the goals, we are going to monitor the site pre, during, and post-construction to see how well water quality and hydrology is improved. Because I am an employee with NC State, I cannot advocate for you to rezone this property, but I will say that if you do rezone the property, the EPA grant that we will use to implement these innovative stormwater practices will make sure that we go above and beyond the current stormwater regulations for the town of Cary, as well as the state. And if you would like any additional information, feel free to contact me. Also, too, this grant and these results will be available to the public, and so we can definitely come back and speak about them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Travis Flewitt with Kimley Horn and Associates here on behalf of the applicant, transportation engineer, professional engineer in the state of North Carolina. Just a couple of points regarding the traffic. I did not perform the traffic analysis. The town's consultant did that, but I've reviewed it. The town's TAR originally done and then revised twice after reducing the unit count by over 100 units, showed relatively minimal impacts in most of the study area intersections. Regarding the U-turn, it was originally proposed to occur here at Research Drive rather than Montebello. In coordination with staff, staff recommended that we relocate that U-turn to Montebello to avoid impacts and conflicts with traffic on Research Drive, particularly traffic coming out of Cary Academy. So that was why it was relocated up to Montebello, where there are fewer conflicts, certainly none with the right turn coming off of Research Drive. So that was deemed to be a much safer condition than what was originally proposed. And as Ms. Grant alluded to, any development that comes in here will have to put in that median. I understand the neighbors' concerns turning off of Montebello, but that median will go in with any development that comes in here. DOT is not going to allow full movement access at the proposed driveway location. As Ms. Grant mentioned, we tried to coordinate with the property to the south. NCDOT indicated that they would only allow full movement access halfway between Weston Parkway and Research Drive, approximately where that mouse arrow is. And the U-turn bulb, where it is, does not preclude that future access from happening. This could be considered a temporary condition, and when that property to the south develops, that median could be taken out and full movement median brake put in at Montebello Drive. The ultimate condition for this section of Harrison Avenue is to be a 6-lane divided roadway. So there will be a median along this section, and DOT has indicated that the intersection of Harrison and Montebello Drive will not remain full movement when that 6-lane divided section is in place. It will either be closed to right in, right out, or possibly at best a directional crossover. One other thing to note is that R40 is not is a holding zoning in the town of Cary. It's not intended to be a low density residential use. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers for the public hearing for this particular rezoning case? I see nobody standing up or waving at me, so I'm going to close the public hearing, and we will now have questions of the staff and or of the applicant. I will start to my left if we care to go that way.
Great, thank you. I apologize. I just got in town, so I didn't get a chance to thoroughly review everything, so some of my questions may be pretty basic. The gentleman that spoke about Kimberly Horn, from Kimberly Horn, when will that 6-lane come in and block that area?
It's not determined.
Well, since you spoke as a public hearing speaker,
He's responding to a question,
come to the applicant. Okay.
There's no immediate plan to do that as far as I know. Ken, correct me if I'm wrong. It would happen as development goes in. Like for the example, this project is to widen an additional lane along their frontage. Any other developments along the section of Harrison would be required to widen. Okay. And then ultimately it just depends on when the town or NCDOT determined that that section was needed, if development didn't put it in place.
That's all I have.
That's it.
Ms. Grannon, could you go back over that easement topic about the, in the upper right-hand corner, there's, I guess, some debate about whether that easement would then get you up to the Arboretum.
This is the property right here, which is owned by Reedy Creek Investments, where there's a parking lot currently.
Yep.
This was all part of the Arboretum site plan when it was first developed, and it was all under the ownership of the Arboretum LLC. Let me find the right slide here, one moment. So this is the Arboretum property, here and here, Renaissance Park Place. This was recorded in 2006. At that time, this property was owned by Arboretum LLC. The property, a couple years after that, was sold to Reedy Creek investors, and this is a recorded easement, a 40-foot access easement that's recorded on the subject property. Our expectation from the ordinance requirements is that this development connect to future development to the south. So if this connection is not made, then the Arboretum is going to be in violation of our ordinance. So it's something that we would expect to have happen. I don't know what the dispute was between the two property owners, but our expectation is that this connection would be a requirement.
And so back to your prettier drawing you were on just before, the drawing you had just before. Now, the nice layout that you had just before, was that page 28 or something?
This is the applicant's rendering.
Yes, the pretty picture here. So the way this is drawn is, this is assuming that easement.
It is assuming that. That is correct.
It wouldn't be there. And if that easement, which is being assumed as being there, a lot of the issues we're hearing about the bulb and so forth do get mitigated potentially, because you could easily access here and
Yes.
get up to Weston Parkway, I guess that would be up there, and
You
be
could
on your
go
way
through
back
the
to-
shopping center
Yep.
and get out to a signalized intersection.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So I'm still confused about this bulb discussion, how that actually works when it's at a street that tees out to Harrison.
One of our traffic engineers can speak to that, and as he's coming up, I wanted to mention too that the proposed mitigation is not to propose a U-turn, it's to propose this bulb out along Harrison Avenue to help make U-turns easier, because you could make a U-turn today. So Mr. Dunn, one of our traffic engineers, can speak to that a little further.
Thank you.
Good evening. The proposed bulb would just facilitate the additional space needed for the turnaround. Often with a two-lane section, there's not quite enough room to actually do the U-turn, so the bulb out will help facilitate that and make that movement safer.
So would it be like, just like a half of a circle that's carved into where the road currently?
Out of the road, so to say. It would be a half circle that would go outside of the existing lane and would enter in, or go outside of the existing roadway.
Okay, I see that. It's an unusual description, but I think that's the first time we've confronted something like that. I just need a little clarification.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't have any questions.
I'll hit my couple while we move down the line. With this mixed-use district, do we have a handle on any kind of a residential percentage existing?
I don't have those details with, it's not, there's no residential with this.
Right.
With this, but within the commercial center.
In the whole commercial center.
Yeah, there's very little. I can pull the slide up, but I don't have that summarized in the report.
That's quite all right. The other question I have is, if there was a different use on this property, just say something kind of a residential use, I thought I heard earlier that the traffic hit from the hotel is comparable or perhaps even less than some other uses? Is that what I heard before? It might have been someone mentioning it.
I don't remember hearing that.
I'm just curious, the increase in traffic that comes from this hotel, I suppose, I'm just asking, if there were an office building that were to be built, it wouldn't have to be that big an office building before it had the same size impact that these hotels would have. Again, that's
We'd
just
have
guessing.
to really
Just-
analyze that and look at the numbers and the types of uses.
That's all I've got. Steve, anything from you?
I just want to make sure I totally understand. Victor asked a really good question about the potential access through the shopping center. I just want to make sure I totally understand that, because I think it's really important. That will not, I mean, I'm not sure what are the odds on this happening, or is that something that can be counted on?
This is something that staff is going to push the Arboretum very hard to do, which then means that the Arboretum owners are going to have to push the owners of this parking lot to have happen, because it was an expectation that this connection be made as a condition of site plan approval for the Arboretum. We have a connectivity ordinance that requires this. So it's not a smooth sailing forward. It's going to take some effort for us to get that. But if this property owner is not willing to work with this property owner to facilitate this, then we're going to have to bring our development compliance team into the equation and address it then.
But yet, this is not a requirement for this to be approved or denied.
Please restate the question.
So, getting the access to the shopping center would not have a bearing on getting this approved or not. It's not something that has to.
It's not a condition of approval, because it's an expectation that this is something that should be able to happen because of our ordinances.
Can it be made a condition of approval?
No, I don't believe so.
I'm not sure if this is helpful. It's not a condition of approval for the rezoning, but at the time of development plan review, our folks will look at access and that sort of thing at that time, and then make a final determination.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Is that it? Dan?
Sure, good evening. I have a couple questions, as I am not a traffic engineer. I'll never be confused for one. But I just want a clarification from the letter from Ramey Kemp and Associates. And in there at the end, there's two items that they talk about. One is the 100 feet of storage and the U-turn build-out. And up above, it talks about the applicant is proposing a 75-foot turn lane and a 50-foot taper. Does that equal 100 feet of storage?
Correct. That was the zoning condition that they provided.
All right, thanks, I just wasn't quite sure there. All right, thank you. And a question on the bulb-out area, and in there was a note that there wasn't enough volume to justify, I guess, a warrant for signalization at Montebello. But that could happen at a future date if there was enough traffic
Correct.
volume?
Mhm.
And so that can come back, so where that bulb out is, that could eventually, at some point in time, if warranted.
Potentially, someday, right.
Potentially someday, yes, all the caveats, potentially someday that could become an intersection, depending on other development in that area, et cetera.
And if the development here to the south were to develop, then we would look for cross-access between those two developments. So there could be a potential, even though there's not, an agreement right now about the use. If there was a future development on the Reedy Creek Investments property to the south, we would look for cross-access between the two developments there as well.
Okay, thank you. I have two other questions, and they're somewhat mundane, and maybe in the narrative, it talks about two modifications to the town of Cary's development standards. One is the intersection spacing of internal streets of 61 feet, where the LDO calls for 100. And I don't have, I don't have the page numbers.
We're looking at the roads, for that, and you can probably speak to this, Travis. Is that correct? The engineer is here.
Okay.
For the plan and can speak to that.
And so the
clarify
question
that.
I just have is, reducing it to 61 feet, if the LDO standard is 150 feet, what does that, does it just mean that the parking lot's tighter? I'm just trying to understand what that means and how significant, because it's obviously more than 50% reduction.
If you could come down and just address that, that would be great. Thank you.
I had a card filled out just in case.
Yeah, if you could just identify with that.
Yes, I'm not sure how I do that. Will they see that mouse? Okay. So the modification was
Could you
actually.
start with who you are, please?
Oh, Gary McCabe, Redline Engineering. I'm the
Thank
engineer record that, for this project. The modification is for this drive aisle and this drive aisle. The center line to center line is about 60-something feet. And your standard says that for a road, there has to be a certain distance between them, and the staff considered these two roads, which as a site engineer, I don't consider that a road, but this distance right here is not 150 feet.
Okay.
It's not this distance. This distance exceeds it. It's these two distances right here. So technically, this should be closed off, and they do the loop and come back around. So it was to allow this, which was twofold. It was for better access internal of the site, but also for closer access for emergency vehicles.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Claire. I was just trying to understand where that applied. And last, on that same, in that same section in the report was an 8% reduction in parking. And it doesn't sound like, so when we have hotels, we have 252 rooms. What is the ratio of parking to rooms? Or is there one? I'm just curious as to whether 8% is a lot or insignificant or.
Yeah. We didn't have any issue with that.
Okay, if you didn't, then that's, if that's, okay.
It's
fine.
within what staff could have approved.
All right,
We could
I
have
just-
approved a 15% reduction. But as long as this was coming forward with a preliminary development plan.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, thanks. Sherry?
I had a couple concerns, but I'm going to hold those until our discussion. But I did have one question about what you were talking about, the expectation of the connection through the Arboretum. Are they allowed to, I mean, do they have to, your expectation, is it to allow traffic to cut through there or just connect there to be able to take
Yeah,
advantage of the
connection with vehicles and pedestrians.
Okay, so they wouldn't be able to put up a sign that says no cut through traffic?
No.
Okay. That's it for me.
Okay, any other questions? One popped in my head. The easement and the connection to the other parcels, that is, as long as we're MXD, it doesn't matter what type of use goes in there. If that hotel is replaced by something else, that connection stays.
The easement is a
The easement.
recorded easement.
Okay,
Right.
great. Thank you. Any other questions at all? Would anyone think about a motion that we could start to discuss?
I would do a motion.
Go right ahead.
I move that the board forward case number 16, REZ 15, to the town council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second?
A second.
I have a second. Discussion, and we're going to try and do something a little different. If you can really hit the high points of the particular policies in the Cary Community Plan in our discussion, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do that. To me, if you go through, you know, the different areas in the Cary Community Plan, to me, it meets everything with the only concern being in what we've spent most of our time talking about, which is the move piece. I've got okay in my mind with the move piece. To me, just kind of as a layperson, citizen's perspective, if we're going to, I'm counting on access to the Arboretum. I think that's what makes this work. If I think about other things that could go here, that would also meet the Cary community plans, if it was to your point, if it was an office building, that's going to generate, the only thing that would not generate this is if it were residential. It's hard to do that. I mean, it's going to be, you know, a lot, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, a lot of development on Harrison. This, to me, seems reasonable with all the accommodations that have been made. And I do believe that if you go down the checklist, it meets everything except for, again, the move is a little weak, but I think it meets it.
Thank you.
He's hit on most of the high points I was going to discuss. To lead with, I do appreciate the changes made over the last couple of years by the applicant to try to get this into a great setup. My only concern was the move chapter, but I think anything that we put in there is going to impact that. So I think this fits as well as it can.
Any other comments on the motion? And once again, if someone intends to oppose it, I'd love to hear their rationale.
I would just comment that with regard to that easement, I can't see any reason that that will not happen. My experience has been once you put an easement on a recorded map pursuant to a town ordinance and it gets recorded in the courthouse, that's pretty much going to happen. Now, staff can't promise us that, but the certainty of it's pretty good. And that makes me feel better about the move issue because it does give that extra access onto the adjoining shopping center, which makes this whole thing work much better, both for traffic reasons and just for other considerations under the plan.
Any other comments on this side?
Yeah, I just reinforce that point. Anything you develop on this piece of property without that easement, it wouldn't be developable in any pleasant way at all. So that is my assumption is that's a done, and it will just be a matter of some discussions to get it done. You just don't have a hotel here where you can check in, but it's hard to check out, particularly if you want to get to 40. So I think this makes good sense, and I think it's a good use of the property. I think it's actually a better use for hotels, again, given the adjacency of the restaurants and everything else, the Arboretum. This is actually a very complementary use to be next door.
Did you have something?
I agree with both of those. I think having that easement is a game changer, and frankly, it didn't hit me until we heard this just in the last 20 minutes or so, that was an absolute requirement of this happening, because without that, I could not support taking U-turns up and down Harrison with as much traffic as I know exists there. But I also think having hotels there is an appropriate use, and certainly the way this has been reconfigured is a much more acceptable proposition with giving more buffer space to the neighborhood next door. But having worked on that end of town for a number of years, I know that there is a shortage of hotel space, and it is a need for all the businesses that populate Weston Parkway. So in particular, that work policy number 2, I think enhancing the local appeal to businesses and workers is a key part of the Cary community plan being met, as well as potentially providing opportunity for more diverse workers in that area. So I would support it.
If I could just add one thing. We see so many of these plans recently where champion trees have got an X on them because they're not going to be there any longer. To see actually preservation of champion trees all in the same sentence is actually a positive. So I applaud the applicant and their thought here about trying to save those champion trees. I think it'll be a plus for the property as well.
Thank you. Any comments on this side? Dan?
I appreciate that the applicant worked so hard and the neighbors. It took 2 years to get there, but 250-foot setback on the buildings, expanding that buffer, preserving the champion trees, the fact that they located the higher elevation on the buildings, the mid-rise buildings, to parallel the Arboretum, all those sorts of things are pluses. My concern was over the move section, still have some concerns, but I also know the staff has looked at this extensively. There's been multiple traffic studies, analysis. And I think right now, you know, Harrison's like many other roadways in Cary, that it may get a little worse before it gets better, being that, you know, we're going to see some cases maybe later on tonight. We can look at that. Yeah, eventually it'll be 6 lanes. When it's 6 lanes, it'll be great. When there's more traffic, then the lights will be there. But until somebody comes in with a master plan to develop every square foot, develop a land, we're going to take it as it comes. And so, but you know, I see that there's some options there. So I'm going to vote for it.
Anything?
I really don't have very much to add, just that I agree. I think that anything that you develop there is going to add to the traffic, and eventually it will probably get a little worse before it gets better. I'm a little comforted on the move section, given the connection to the Arboretum. So I think this is a good use of the land. I did a little bit of study before to see exactly where there are hotels in the area, and besides the key one over there by SAS, there isn't really any. So I think this is good.
I just have a couple of comments on traffic too. Like Mr. McFarland said, I mean, we're going to see, no matter who comes in here, whether it's one of the employers building a new office building in that area or somebody else, you know, building an office building or something, it's going to get worse before it gets better. These are growing pains traffic-wise. There is just one thing that kind of nags at me a little bit, and that is that sort of roundabout through the neighborhood as a means of getting to the traffic light to turn left. This is a hotel, and it is, granted, there'll be some people who come here routinely because they're doing business trips, but if that's used by folks from this particular parcel, if they go through the neighborhood, it's people who aren't familiar with that neighborhood who are going through there. And that's a little more frightening to me than someone who knows that neighborhood real well, knows, you know, they go through there every day and they know where the kids are and where everything is. But someone who's, you know, here from Memphis for 2 or 3 days may not. And that, but with the easement, that makes me feel so much better. Cary Community Plan, consistency-wise, I think it fails traffic, but on balance with all the others, I think on balance it is consistent, or in my mind, consistent enough for me to be okay with it. Anyone else? Would all those in favor of the motion on the floor please say aye? Aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say no. That motion carries 8-0. We now move to our second, I gotta find my agenda here. 17 REZ 27, Ms. Brya is here to talk to us about Bainbridge, Cary, Chapel Hill Road crossing.
Good evening, Board. For your consideration is a request to rezone 16.06 acres. This is at the intersection of Northwest Maynard Road and Chapel Hill Road. The site includes an assemblage of 13 properties. Many of these formerly contained large lot single-family homes. And these homes were demolished in 2011, so the site's currently vacant. The properties are currently zoned residential 40, residential 20, resource recreation, and they are in the mixed-use overlay district. The mixed-use overlay district also includes a mixed-use sketch plan, which was approved in 2008, which allows retail, office, and residential uses. This is a copy of the sketch plan. It's called the Maynard Village Mixed-Use Sketch Plan. The buildings in red represent commercial buildings, blue represent office, and yellow residential. This plan allowed a maximum of 70,000 square feet for office, 54,000 square feet for commercial, and 24 residential dwelling units. And so to develop this site, the applicant could choose to develop under the base zoning, which is R40, R20. They could develop under this mixed-use sketch plan, or they could choose a rezoning. And so in this case, the applicant's chosen to seek a rezoning to mixed-use district. The mixed-use district is a flexible zoning district that requires a preliminary development plan to be submitted with the rezoning. And in this case, the applicant has proposed a multifamily development with a maximum of 259 units, plus a clubhouse and amenities. This is a copy of the illustrative plan of the preliminary development plan. You can see from this plan there will be 4 residential buildings plus a clubhouse located here. They're also proposing 2 areas for community gathering space, one centrally located within this main building, as well as one up towards the intersection of the 2 roads. What you see before you now is the actual preliminary development plan, a full copy of which is included in the staff report. The site will be surface parked. They will have they're showing 2 stormwater control devices, one to the west and then one to the south. And again, you can see the buildings located here in blue, and the open space areas are designated with this orange color. With this plan, the applicants requested several modifications. First, to remove 14 champion trees, and I'll show an image of that in just a few slides. They're also requesting some minor streetscape averaging, parking reduction. They're requesting to waive a requirement for an internal street connection. And what that is the town's ordinance requires a street connection whenever you have a property of a certain size that has road frontage on 2 thoroughfares or a thoroughfare and a collector. And so with this site, you would still be able to have access from Maynard Road, traversing the site to Chapel Hill Road, but they're requesting to not do that through a street connection, you would instead traverse the site through the parking lot. They're also requesting to not have a vehicular connection to the west. And then lastly, they're requesting to not to bury the existing above-ground utilities. Since the case went to the public hearing for town council, they have proposed additional conditions to the site. They've committed to having a swimming pool on the site, a clubhouse with a minimum size of 5,000 square feet, a covered outdoor gathering space of 1,500 square feet, a dog park, and a public art amenity, which would be located towards the intersection of Chapel Hill Road and Northwest Maynard Road. The applicant has also submitted a trip generation attachment, which is included in the staff report. This was a request of the council at the public hearing. This compares to vehicular traffic that would be generated from this site compared to the previously approved mixed-use sketch plan. And the applicant will be sharing more information on that during their comments. Lastly, the applicant has informed the staff on June 14th of their intention to add 2 additional conditions. First is to preserve 1 additional champion tree near the intersection of Chapel Hill Road and Maynard. Second is a condition to add a pedestrian crossing on the southeast corner at Maynard and Chapel Hill Road, and this pedestrian crossing to connect, again, southeast corner to the State Employees Credit Union across the street. Now, these conditions were added after the deadline to add new conditions, so they're not included in your staff report. However, the conditions, as indicated by the applicant, would be added as the case moves forward to the town council. So as I noted, there are a total of 23 champion trees on the site, 9 of which are being preserved as part of the development. The applicant has stated that the abundance of champion trees located on the site are due to the previous use of single-family lots. So you can see from this image here, the trees in green are those which are being preserved, and those which are red are trees which will be removed as part of the site development. The tree that the applicants indicated recently that they will be taking steps to preserve is this tree located near the intersection of Maynard and Chapel Hill Road. Again, this wasn't included in the staff report, but will be reflected as the case moves to the town council. This is a copy of how the trees interact with the proposed development with the preliminary development plan. You can see the trees that they're showing here in red, many of which conflict with the main access to the drive, as well as the main building. So these will be removed, and again, they're proposing to save the tree shown in green, plus this 1 additional tree that they'll be showing as it moves forward. Oh, excuse me. They're also proposing to do some minor streetscape averaging with this site. You can see they're proposing just some minor streetscape reductions up towards the intersection of Maynard and Chapel Hill Road, and some streetscape additions further down on the site as shown here. So staff has evaluated the site using the Imagine Cary community plan and found the appropriate policies were located in the live, work, engage, shape, and move chapters. And first we look at the future growth framework map, which shows the site as a commercial center designation. Commercial centers are defined as having shopping centers of about 5 to 10 acres or more, anchored by a supermarket or equivalent. Commercial centers may also have residential, office, or institutional uses, which can be mixed either vertically or horizontally on adjacent sites. And commercial centers are typically located at major street intersections and are designed to have maximum convenience to providing daily retail and service needs within convenient distances to homes. When we look at the live policies of the Cary community plan, the rezoning request appears to conform to the overall goal of meeting the increasing demand for smaller household demographics, and the site also benefits from a reasonable proximity to major retail and entertainment options. Conversely, the immediate site vicinity does not display a full range of mixed-use characteristics due to the limited retail and entertainment venues directly adjacent to the site. Additionally, there's no indication in the applicant's submission that there will be any form of non-residential use located on the site to support the mixed-use intent of the location policy. When we look at the work chapter, it's noted that multifamily housing at this location is adjacent to transit routes and is in close proximity to major employment areas. However, at this particular commercial center, the existing zoning and mixed-use sketch plans for 3 of the quadrants did envision this area would be redeveloped as part of a predominantly retail and office center. A typical use of this type is appropriate at intersections of 2 major thoroughfares. The subject site also exhibits many of the locational characteristics that would support future office or commercial development, and it enjoys good transportation links, good visibility, and is located adjacent to existing developed commercial areas. When we look at the engaged chapter, staff notes that there are not documented historic resources on the property, but it does share a western property boundary with the Nancy Jones House property, which was built circa 1803. The Nancy Jones House is believed to be the oldest house in Cary and served as an important stagecoach stop and tavern during the antebellum and Civil War era. In order to make a visual transition between the proposed development and the Nancy Jones House, a substantial natural buffer along the western property line is desirable. When we look at the town of Cary's GIS maps, it's noted that the site does not appear to be impacted by stream buffers. However, field determination of that will occur at the time of plan review. According to the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Facilities master plan, there is a proposed street side trail. However, that's north on Chapel Hill Road, not directly adjacent to this site. According to the transportation plan, both Chapel Hill Road and Maynard are major thoroughfares, and the site is adjacent to existing transit facilities. And there was a transportation study completed for the site. There were several deficiencies at the study intersections, as shown here. The applicant has offered to complete some of the above recommended transportation improvements, most of which benefit the proposed development and alleviate the site impacts on Chapel Hill Road and Maynard Road at their entrances. The applicant proposed improvements, as well as the traffic study recommendation improvements, have been discussed with NCDOT, and they concur with the proposed improvements. There was a neighborhood meeting held for the site in October. There were 3 attendees at this meeting. Some of the questions were about the proposed use, the town regulations. There were some representatives from the North Carolina Railroad Company in attendance because they are adjacent to the site, and they shared some information about their processes. At the public hearing in April, there were 5 speakers. Some of the speakers talked about impacts of new construction and development. In particular for this area, not just this particular site, also traffic in the area, and there was some concerns about stormwater as well. Some of the council feedback included some questions about the previous sketch plan that was approved for the site, concern regarding the number of champion trees that would be impacted with the development. There was some concern over the lack of a mix of uses for the site, and questions about pedestrian and bicycle safety. So to conclude staff's analysis, this is a case where there were many pros and cons. As I shared during the presentation, the case was found to be consistent with some policies of the plan and inconsistent with other policies. And after a full review of the site, staff's conclusion of our analysis is that the rezoning is generally inconsistent with the Imagine Cary community plan. Staff's technical analysis finds the following. The rezoning encompasses the entire southwest quadrant of the intersection of Northwest Maynard and Chapel Hill Road, 16 acres total. The applicant is only proposing one use, which is multifamily, and this would preclude a mixture of uses on this site. The property is in a commercial center on the future growth framework map, which states that commercial, both small and large format, are the predominant land uses, and that residential uses are incidental. And further, that residential and office uses should be mixed vertically or horizontally. When we look at the site design, staff notes the preliminary development plan reflects a multifamily community with surface parking. Since the proposed use is residential, the buildings are located internally to the site and do not substantially address the road or intersection. A non-residential use or a mixture of uses may provide a greater opportunity to frame this key intersection in town. The applicant has also proposed to remove a substantial number of champion trees. While staff agrees a large number of champion trees presents development challenges, it is our opinion that there may be opportunities for a more creative design to preserve additional trees. Lastly, the site is adjacent to the Nancy Jones house. To make a visual transition between the proposed development and the Nancy Jones house property, a substantial buffer along the western property line is desirable. The preliminary development plan reflects the minimum required buffer per the LDO and proposes a large step stormwater control device adjacent to the shared property line. So based on staff's analysis of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, staff's preliminary recommendation is for denial. Preparation for the public hearing tonight, staff has notified properties within 800 feet of the site. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is here to share comments. And before the applicant approaches, the applicant has submitted a couple exhibits that they like to share with the Planning and Zoning Board, which have been included into the PowerPoint. I'm going to run through those really quickly. Again, this is all information that was included in the staff report, but just packaged by the applicant. First, they prepared an overview showing the existing entitlements from the mixed-use sketch plan compared to the proposed plan. The trip generation comparison, this is, again, was attached to your staff report. What this shows is trips that would be generated from the previous mixed-use sketch plan compared to today's proposed rezoning. They've also showed an exhibit showing the proposed distance between the existing Nancy Jones house and the closest building for the site, as well as a copy of what the revised preliminary development plan would look like with the additional trees saved and the additional pedestrian connection to the property across Maynard. So again, this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's here to share comments, and following that, we'll have the public hearing. We'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. First speaker in our public hearing, as always, is the applicant.
Good evening again, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group, wearing a hat that I'm much more comfortable wearing, standing up representing an applicant in the case. Here on behalf of Bainbridge, who is the proposed developer of this site, here with me tonight from Bainbridge is Mr. Ron Pereira and Charles Persons. Also here with me tonight is Brad Reinhold of the McAdams Company. They've done the land planning and engineering on the site. And lastly, Richard Adams from Kimley Horn and Associates has been engaged to represent the applicant related to the traffic impacts associated with this use. We're excited to be here. This is an exciting use. Bainbridge, a little bit about them, they're newer to the Cary market. They do what I would consider top of the market multifamily. That's what they do. They develop in Charlotte, DC, Florida, areas like that, and our recent entrees into this market include most recently the apartments that they constructed at the intersection of Aviation and Evans. If you're familiar with the apartments that recently went up there, that's a Morrisville project. They opened in February, and they've been open for about 6 months now, or 4 months now. Again, excited to be here. These are, as you all are aware, there's a lot of multifamily development going on. In fact, a quote from a newspaper article last summer says, "Do we have housing for young people and seniors? No, it's all for middle-aged or younger people. So as people age in this community, they're not going to be able to stay here if we don't get more apartments or maintenance-free living." That was a quote from the town manager, Sean Stiegel, back in July of 2017. And this, ironically, this case was filed shortly after that quote. I don't think they were waiting for the quote to file the case. But what Mr. Stiegel touched on is certainly reflective of the marketplace, and that is there's a high demand for apartment living. And you all have seen the cases come forward. There's two primary target demographics in multifamily right now: millennials and seniors. And both of those are growing portions of the population in the town of Cary and the Triangle in general. And so we're excited to bring forward a project that will directly assist with addressing a problem that even the town manager's office recognizes a problem, and that is there's not sufficient housing at the apartment level as of today. One thing I want to share with you as it relates to this particular site, and if I can. We studied a 1.25 mile radius around this site. My client went and did a survey of all of the multifamily opportunities in that 1.25 mile radius, identified 15 developments that had been 15 different apartment types. Some were small, some were large, showed up in that 1.25 mile radius. Only 4 of those had been built within the last 15 years, and only 1 of those was a market rental apartment community. That's the Meridian at Harrison. That's the newer apartments next to the Harris Teeter. So put another way, in the last 15 years, within 1.25 miles of this, which I brought this up because you see the downtown special planning area, the 1.25 mile radius around this site includes downtown, or a good portion of it. That includes where we're standing, or I'm standing right now, and you all are seated. Only 1 market rate apartment community has been developed within 1.25 miles of this site over the last 15 years. Again, that underscores the fact that this particular portion of the town is significantly underserved. And so as you heard from the staff, and we recognize that, as a policy document, there are going to be cases where some policies, fit and some policies don't. We believe that is a compelling reason to locate multifamily in this location because it is addressing a need that exists today, and it is doing so in a place where it's not only located within 2 major employment centers, as noted in the staff report, it's also really close to downtown. And as you all are aware, downtown has gone through a renaissance recently related to primarily retail, but the town is exploring opportunities to bring employment to downtown, and we believe this site is very well situated to house folks that will be living and working in the downtown area. So the details of the proposed development, let's see if I can. I'll use the slide here. The proposed plan before you is for 259 multifamily units, again, located at a fairly critical intersection. We prepared this exhibit primarily because there was a lot of questions at the public hearing from council related to what is currently approved and what could be developed on the site as of today. And we obviously believe that the mixed-use zoning that applies to the site right now that could be developed as a matter of right is not the right use of the land. And we think that the apartments are a superior option, not only for the town, but also for this specific area. We don't believe incorporating mixed use onto our site makes sense. We think that doing so will end up creating competition for downtown retailers. This is in fact walkable. It's a mile walk. In fact, I know for a fact that Deborah Grannon makes that walk to Jimmy John's fairly regularly. And it doesn't seem like it would be walkable, but that's how close this is to downtown. And so we believe that shoehorning in a mixture of uses on this site is not the right thing to do. Further, as you all are aware, a lot more people are working from home. And the communities that Bainbridge builds, again, targeting millennials, incorporate a lot of work from home options. And so while we can't condition those things because it's not technically an office use, they have conference rooms that are available to their residents that you can go and you can reserve them. You can actually plug in. They've got screens on the wall that allow you to telecommute essentially from your apartment. They're also building individual offices as part of the residential use where residents can reserve office space, in an effort to be able to address a growing population that a lot of them are working at home a lot more than their predecessors. And so we believe that the plan that is before you all tonight it will be a significant benefit to the town. From a community plan analysis standpoint, again, we believe that on balance, this plan is consistent. We appreciate the staff's review of it, but we disagree with the ultimate conclusion from a consistency standpoint. And if you read the staff's proposal, there's really kind of two critical things, and I'm going to touch on a couple of things, and I'm going to run out of time more than likely, but there's two critical things that they focus on. One relates to not having a mixture of uses, which again, we don't think is the right thing in this location. And then second, it relates to this community having surface parking and not having structured parking. And structured parking would obliterate most of the trees that are on the site right now, for starters, but is a much larger scale development. It just can't afford it in this location. And if you look around in that 1.25 mile radius that I mentioned, there are no communities, multifamily communities, that have structured parking as part of that development. So we believe on balance the plan is in fact consistent with the Cary Community Plan. A couple of additional things I want to point out. From a trip generation standpoint, this is a question at the public hearing. What you see on the left is total trips, and what you see on the right is peak hour trips. The light blue is the base plan that exists as of today. The dark blue is if the office incorporated into that plan were developed as a medical office. And then what you see is the lightest blue, kind of the shortest one, that is the apartment community that's being proposed today. So a much lower traffic generator. That's been well received as we have talked to folks in the community. Actually, after the public hearing, there was some confusion that folks had. We had another neighborhood meeting after that public hearing. And the folks that we heard from favored a plan that resulted in less traffic on 54. As you all are aware, it's a significantly traveled thoroughfare. The Nancy Jones house is 660 feet away from the closest building that is located on the site. We have roughly 200 feet of setback wired into our plan, and so we don't think there's additional screening or additional buffering that needs to happen on our site for the benefit of that house. Again, 660 feet is like 2 football fields. And then lastly, as staff noted, we actually, after the public hearing, made 2 additional changes. One is to save a champion tree here and incorporate that into the open space / public art. And then secondly, to include a sidewalk connection. There was a concern associated with making this crossing here, and so a sidewalk has been added as part of the case. And so with that, it appears my time is running out, but I do want to say we think this is the right use in the right location and will do wonders for downtown employment opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to speak to us for the public hearing on this case, come on down.
Hi, my name is Dan Morales. I live on 9370 Chapel Hill Road, adjacent to this property. So my main concerns are traffic. Anything you put on this property is going to generate a lot of traffic. And this intersection is extremely, extremely busy. So 2 main thoroughfares, NC 54, Maynard Road, a lot of traffic. And what kind of concerned me was when you guys were discussing the previous rezoning about the cavalier attitude of, well, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Well, that's why we're having this discussion. I mean, it doesn't have to get worse in order to get better. You guys help determine that. So if you're just going to say, well, we'll just provide a little bit more traffic later on down the road when other properties get developed, it's just going to be handled then. It doesn't have to. That's why we're coming to you to say, we don't want this because the traffic is already bad. And if you guys just say, well, we'll just go ahead and pass this along, let the next person do it, it doesn't fly. So that's one of my concerns. The other concern that I have is stormwater. So we've gone through some problems with the development of the church next to us and the storm runoff. And when I see, plans like this where we have retention ponds of this humongous plan with all this asphalt, all these buildings, that water's got to go somewhere. The stormwater plans these days are woefully undersized anyway, to begin with. And now we're telling us, well, we'll just use these retention ponds to help alleviate that. I don't buy it. So the other things that really concern me at this point is infrastructure. You put in all these families. Well, where are they going to go to school? Utilities. It's woefully undersized. And the last part is, yeah, maybe in the past 7 years, there has been a lot of development. But down the road from us, I can tell you, 2 large multifamily developments are going in. So I would say that this is just not necessary. And I would say, please disapprove it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak to this, this rezoning case? All right, then the public hearing is closed, and we can start our questions of staff or the applicant. And as usual, I'm taking turns. We'll go to the right this time.
Thanks, Mark. I guess I'm a little confused because based on what I've seen staff present, I agree with the town council about the lack of mixed use, and I'm trying to figure out why they're proposing a mixed use here instead of, if they're going to build apartments here, having a residential rezoning request instead of mixed use, or maybe I'm getting them messed up in the head.
Yeah, sure. So the applicants are requesting mixed-use district. It's the name of the district, and they can propose a mix of uses or a single use within that district. The mixed-use district essentially is a flexible zoning district. It requires a preliminary development plan with the rezoning. So even though the request is for mixed-use district, their proposal is for one use.
That answers my question. I'm just processing it right now. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime you see a plan with a rezoning, the rezoning is for mixed-use district, and all that means is that there's a preliminary development plan with it.
Okay, because what I am processing in my head is that they're wanting to build apartments here, which is great. However, the mixed use kind of makes it sound like they're might propose something in addition to the apartments, which probably wouldn't be the best use here.
Right, so they're only proposing apartments. So with this request, it would be 259 apartments plus the clubhouse and associated amenities. That would be the only use that would be allowed if this rezoning were to move forward and get approved.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Good evening. Quick couple of questions. The open space on this property, it's a 16-acre site. Any idea what that the open space in the northwest corner, or the northeast corner, rather?
The size of it?
Yeah, what the size of that is?
Take a look. Does someone from the applicants team happen to know the size? I don't see it called out on the plan in front of me, so I'm going to see if someone happens to know that.
I was just curious, because from a public, at least from my, I just want to know, because that's the open space that's available to the public.
Do you have another question? While you're
Yeah, I do. While we're waiting, I have a couple other questions. Thank you, Mark. One is the recent addition of a condition by the applicant, was it for a sidewalk or a crosswalk?
It was for a crosswalk that would cross Northwest Maynard across to the State Employees Credit Union intersection, the southeast intersection. So yeah, it would actually be a crosswalk with associated pedestrian signals.
So that would connect that sidewalk that's on that property now to basically the Black Creek Greenway. And when we talk about a sidewalk, crosswalk, is that like signaling, the whole, like pedestrian signaling, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes,
Okay.
and they'll need to officially add that as it moves forward to the town council. So we'll review that officially once that's submitted.
I appreciate that. Does the town control, so as we're, and if they don't have an answer to it, I can guess by looking at the scale here. The Nancy Jones property adjacent to this, is that controlled by the town?
I don't believe so at this time.
Okay, so that's being controlled, that's under private control?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Beyond a piece of public art on that open space in the corner, was there anything else that's being proposed there, I mean?
It's just noted as active open space, and they did identify public art, so that would actually be determined during the plan review.
Okay, sure, okay, thanks.
Mr. McFarland, to answer your question, it's roughly half an acre in that location. And we have designated public art there, and again, you'll note we have managed to save the champion tree in that location, so preliminarily their design is to kind of build that public space around that champion tree that's being saved.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, Steve?
My questions have been asked.
So the only question I've got is, with the last case we just had, there was a mandatory connectivity, if you will, between the two parcels. That's because of the commercial center or because they were both MXD? And I ask because they're asking to not be connected to the adjacent property, which lies outside both commercial and MXD. Is that the reason that they can ask for that and that we were so insistent in the other case?
So a connection to adjacent properties is a requirement. In this particular case, the applicants are requesting not to connect to this western property where the Nancy Jones house is located. And I think a similar request could have been asked for the other property, and that could have been considered with the previous request. They're not asking for that with that one, though. So in this case, they're asking to not have that vehicular connection to the west.
Okay, fair enough. That's the only question I had.
Yes, I'm trying to understand exactly how the earlier sketch plan plays into this now that we've adopted a new Cary plan.
So the sketch plan was approved in 2008. It's an entitlement that allows someone to develop the site as shown with that sketch plan. So someone can use the sketch plan if they develop it exactly how that site layout shows. And if they chose, if for some reason they can't meet the requirements of that sketch plan or they want to develop differently, then their options would be to come through a rezoning and request a different zoning district, and that's what they're doing in this case.
Okay.
I have no further questions.
Could you show one of the aerial maps that shows kind of a little zoom out, Ms. Dry? Maybe one with the, you know, the traffic, or the one with the park. Yeah, well, this is good enough right here. So Chapel Hill Road to the north, what are the plans for widening that? I know there's some widening plans someplace in the town of Cary plan for the future. You know, I think that's one of the ones that gets to be a lot wider than it is today. Could someone speak to that widening? And as well, Northwest Maynard as well along the other side of that property. I'm just curious, the road widening that's anticipated there.
So for Chapel Hill Road, the road width map shows that as a 6-lane divided facility in the future. For Maynard, I believe it's basically the section that's there today. Does that answer the question?
Yes. So would this proposed development have in any way facilitate that 6-lane widening of Chapel Hill Road, at least along its frontage?
Yeah, they need to do their frontage widening that's required at.
Okay, so
that'll
would be to that future
development plan.
long-range plan of 6 lanes?
Correct.
All right, all right. And where we're, again, it was hard to read on the other diagram you had there with the site plan. Could you just point out with your pointer there, Ms. Dry? Thank you on the roads, I appreciate it. If you could just point out again, where were the ins and outs to the roads there? I only could see 2. Maybe that, but there was some other things about, you know, internal roads or something, and I wasn't sure if that implied other ways to get in and out. So there's the one nice big entrance onto Chapel Hill Road.
Yes, right here.
Okay.
And then a right in and right out on
Right in, right out.
Northwest Maynard.
And that's it?
That's it.
Okay, I thought some of the other stuff looked like ins and outs, but okay, that's all there is there.
Right, that's correct.
All right. That's the only questions I have.
We'll finish it off.
Mine have been answered.
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? If not, you know how it goes. Anyone?
All right, I'll move that the board forward case number 17 REZ 27 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second? For approval, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Would you begin our discussion for approval?
Well, I think I agree with some of the concerns that the staff had in terms of this being, the move part of it, I guess, concerns me because these are two very heavily traveled and congested roads, and to have a multifamily residential area stuck kind of in a little triangle there in between them is a little concerning with no way to get across. There is no way to cross that street if you're a pedestrian. However, the fact that they have just put forward a potential condition for a crosswalk with some kind of monitoring or accessibility for pedestrians is some consolation to that. But it's a compelling argument if there are no other apartment complexes within a walkable distance of downtown to think that there's something now that's available to people who might not otherwise have been able to live within a reasonable distance of the downtown growth area is a positive. So I would say that if some of those issues, those concerns are met, and also the distance from that historical property being what it is, it overcomes some of the objection to it being potentially at risk. So.
Thanks. And the second?
I wrestled with this case a lot, and I can appreciate and I could understand how staff would ask for move of denial, and it may very well have merit for doing that. I've looked at this, gone through some aspects of it that were personal heartburn and champion trees, but realized that even under the original plan, the sketch back, going back to 11 years ago, they would have lost all the champion trees. And I looked at it, it does meet many aspects of the work, of the live chapters 2 and 3, as the staff pointed out. I think it helps to enhance the number of the work chapters in terms of the type of housing that it's providing. I think on the move chapter, I think it has some benefits. There's two things that I guess why I'm voting, why I think that it's appropriate for this site. Because although I appreciate and in theory I support the mixed use, commercial retail, I would agree from looking, my opinion is that it doesn't work everywhere. It doesn't work financially everywhere. There's not a business case, and I just was in a city this past weekend where I saw that was happening, and it's like, there's gonna be a lot of first floor vacant windows. This has access to public transit on Chapel Hill and Maynard. It's within a mile of 3 major shopping areas. So it's not that these folks are gonna be in an island. There's 3 areas, major shopping areas with multiple opportunities to buy food, to shop for clothing, entertainment, all those things. So it's a little bit, because of the proximity to all that, I can see where the case is, well, if you can walk to it, you could ride your bike to it, and you could drive a short way, or you could take public transit to get to it. That site's been there for a long time, and unless the town dictated to somebody, to the owners, that this is what can work, I think this will work there, and it makes sense there, at least to me.
Okay.
So.
Anyone else? This side? Anyone else on this side? Yes.
I'm really struggling with it. Just top of my head, I buy all the arguments the applicant made about housing and mix and so forth, which we frequently use. Whenever we're talking about new housing in the town of Cary, I do have a reaction to housing like this multifamily right along a railroad track. Okay, it happens. I think the abundance of housing in this area would perhaps be benefited more with the existing residents in the neighborhoods there, with something that was more consistent with a mixed-use center in a traditional way of retail and office and those sorts of things as well. I think it would better serve the abundance of housing that already exists here. But I like the arguments that were made about what's proposed here in many ways, but I think if I look zoomed out at the area, I think this still is asking for being mixed use. And again, I wouldn't see that as being such an issue to be located adjacent to a railroad track and where it's situated here as it is. So I'm leaning to say no, consistent with the Town of Cary planning staff's point of view.
Okay, anyone else? And again, if you're going to vote no, I'd love to hear about it.
I tend to agree with Victor that and somehow this doesn't impress me as being what we normally expect in a mixed-use district. And yes, the statute says it can be one single use. But my thought is that if it's going to be one single use, there has to be a truly compelling reason to do it. And I'm not sure that I see it in this proposal. So I would be looking more for one I would consider a true mixed-use development.
I'm also going to vote no. Basically the same reasons. If I look at all the different categories, it does meet a lot of the plan, but I can't get past changing what it was intended to be, which is mixed use, even though there is this one caveat that can be one use. I normally don't like doing that, but for this location, I think it would be possible. I'm not concerned about, there seems to be a huge buffer between that and the Nancy Jones house. So I think, it meets that standard well. There's something that's going to go on this property. I know it's been a long time coming, but I just feel if I look at the surrounding area from a high view, that it really seems to beg for to be some sort of a mixed use. So I can't get past that section in the plan.
I feel the same way. I think that needs to be a little bit more clear. So I plan on voting no on this one.
Anyone else? I guess I'm the only one. Yeah, and I will also not support it, just simply because I have not seen anything yet that convinces me not to concur with staff's recommendation on balance of the policies in the Cary Community Plan. That said, if no one else has a comment to make, I'm going to call this for a vote. With all those in favor of approval for 17 RZ 27, please put your hand up and say aye. Aye. I have 3. Would all those opposed say no, please? And put your hand up as well. No, and there are 5 no's. And okay, so the motion fails 3-5. Just because staff said denial doesn't mean we have to put a motion for denial for it. We can just let this wither on the vine as it is, I believe. No compelling reason to do that otherwise.
I think it'd be great if we had a clear vote on whether you think it's consistent with the plan or not.
I can do a motion for that if that would work.
It would be great.
Okay. So this would be a motion to deny because it's not consistent with the community plan. So I move that the board forward case number 17 REZ 27 to Town Council with a recommendation for denial as it is not consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and denial is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second? Any other discussion other than what we had before? No? All those in favor of denial, please put your hand up, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Same inverse. That's what it's called, inverse, right? Yeah. 5-3, motion for denial carries. We sit at 8:28. You want to crack through one more, or do you want to take a short break? We usually call them at the 2-hour point for 5 minutes. What do you think? Okay. First person to speak to me said break, so that's what we do. We'll take a 5-minute break, and we will be right back.
I'm that guy. It only takes one.
My candy melt. All right, we are back to finish our last public hearing case. We are at 17 REZ 32. Mr. Loveland is speaking to us now. Thanks for waiting for us.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Board. This is a request for a rezoning for a property that is approximately 2.12 acres from Wake County zoning to an industrial conditional use. The property is located at the southeast corner of Tryon Road and Campbell Road. There is an existing retail landscape nursery located on the site. Retail uses and non-residential uses located to the north and to the west. Of particular note is the Swift Creek Shopping Center to the southwest, located in the bottom right-hand corner, or left-hand corner, excuse me, of the screen there. To the east and to the south, you have residential uses. Directly to the south is actually a small cemetery, but there are larger lot, single-family uses to the south of that. And then farther to the east, of course, as you can see, you have the Swift Creek Elementary School. This aerial view provides a little better look at the existing nursery use, consisting mainly of one-story buildings. Of course, if the applicant's request is approved, this would be replaced with a mini storage use. Property is presently located in Wake County, outside of the town limits, and not in the ETJ. It has a Wake County Residential 40 watershed designation currently. The applicant has submitted an annexation petition, which will be considered by town council. The request is to rezone this to an industrial conditional use. The conditions pertaining to use restriction, so restricting the use only to mini storage and not allowing any of the other uses customarily allowed in industrial. The units would be accessed from the interior of the building only. Perimeter lighting would be directed towards the interior of the site. And lastly, the last condition that I offered at the town council hearing was in regards to the masonry requirement. The architectural requirements of the community appearance manual, as you may be aware, require a certain amount, 75% of masonry for the non-transparent portions of facade. The applicant's condition would restrict that material to just brick and cast stone. In addition to these conditions that the applicant offered initially, they have since the town council hearing offered the following additional conditions, requiring a master sign plan that includes a condition of reduction in the size of the wall sign. The ground signs shall not be internally illuminated. Condition regarding the color of any of the roll-up style doors that are visible from the street, those would be restricted to black. And additional understory trees along each of the streetscape, along Campbell Road and along Tryon Road. This is a conceptual elevation drawing that was submitted by the applicant. It is not binding and represents only one possible solution for a mini storage meeting the architectural requirements of the CAM. But it was submitted by the applicant, so we'll show it here. I'm sure the applicant will probably bring this up and discuss it more. Staff has found the following goals of the Imagine Cary community plan to be of particular relevance in this case. Provide appropriate transitions. The community plan talks about transitions can be form, land use, architectural, or landscape buffers. I think in this case, the land use and the buffers are of particular importance here, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as we go along. Support and facilitate infill and redevelopment. This, of course, would represent a redevelopment site. Maintain Cary's attractive appearance. This site represents a gateway into Cary. It is along one of the major thoroughfares into southeast corner of Cary. The site is designated within the Crossroads Destination Center in the Future Growth Framework map. The GIS mapping does not identify any stream buffers on the site. On the transportation plan, Tryon Road is designated as a thoroughfare. It is important to note that there is a median on this section of Tryon Road. It does allow leftover movement on the Campbell, but does prevent left out. Campbell Road is designated as a collector street. It also has a median near the intersection with Tryon that is restricting some movement. At neighborhood meeting, there were no neighbors that came out to that meeting. At the public hearing in front of town council, there were 2 speakers in addition to the applicant that came out to be heard. One speaker voiced general support of the proposed use, preferring the mini storage use over retail or restaurant use. The second speaker did express some concerns regarding the industrial zoning district, the building height, or potential building height, and the amount of potential impervious surface on the site. Staff, of course, did notify property owners within 800 feet of the site. The community plan generally envisions more intense type development within destination centers. But this proposal, while it is not an intense use, mini storage is generally not considered to be an extremely intense use, does represent a good land use transition from the non-residential and retail uses to the north and to the west, to the transitioning to the residential uses to the east and to the south. Given the access restrictions that are existing on Tryon Road and on Campbell Road, may hinder more intense retail uses or more intense non-residential uses, this may represent a good compromise. This is, of course, a redevelopment of the site. It will be a more intense use than the landscape nursery that is there now. And finally, the zoning conditions do offer additional protection beyond the nature of the use itself in regards to lighting conditions, architectural controls, and some landscape conditions that will help provide a good transition to the residential uses to the east and to the south. So, on balance, staff finds that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan and is therefore has a preliminary recommendation of approval. We will, of course, be available to answer any questions after the public hearing.
Thank you. Public hearing opens with the applicant.
Good evening again. Chair Evangelista, members of the Planning and Zoning Board, Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the applicant. My client, Be Safe Storage, is here as well. They're the proposed builders of this mini storage facility or self-storage facility. Doug's done a great job of describing the nature of the request, so I don't want to reiterate a lot of what he has said. I want to hit a couple of points because I know it's confusing. You see industrial zoning in an area like this, and you say, "Gosh, well, how are we zoning property, in the watershed next to an elementary school for an industrial use?" It's one of the 2 zoning districts that mini storage is permitted in. The town, I think, has been in the process for a while of trying to re-examine its mini storage zoning districts. There was a time where mini storage was much more of an industrial use. You got the roll-up doors, single story, kind of barrack style. Evolution of mini storage facilities has changed the look, the impact, the feel, the appropriateness of mini storage facilities in a lot of places. And so we're compelled to ask for a zoning district where it's permitted. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing up in front of you with an industrial use. It's important to note, as Doug indicated, that mini storage is the only use that's being permitted as part of this this industrial conditional use. So that is a condition of the case. I want to touch on a couple of things. So the site is technically in a destination center, which you wouldn't think of a mini storage use being located in a destination center. But it's, as Doug talked about, it has some site constraints, and it's adjacent to property that currently houses Swift Creek Elementary School that is also designated in the destination center. And so this was, I think, was kind of a hanger-on, and I don't think if anybody looked closely at it, you look at this and say, this is an area where large-scale, intense uses would be appropriate. As Doug mentioned, access is very challenged for the site. There's a median divide out onto Tryon Road, so this is a right-in, right-out movement at this location. And so what that means is that anybody who wants to travel west from this site actually has to cut through the shopping center or to take Campbell Road down to Holly Springs, and they wouldn't do that. They would end up cutting through the shopping center. Additionally, folks who are accessing the site from the east have to come and access the signal here at Jones Franklin, and then make their way through the shopping center in order to get to the site. So from a viability of non-residential uses on the site, it's pretty limited. I mean, there's not a whole lot of retailers who are going to want to set up shop with such limited access to the site. And so we think that that makes a compelling reason to have a use like this, which is an incredibly low traffic generator. As you all have heard in other cases, many storage uses have really low traffic generation. So from a use standpoint, we think that fits really well given the site's access constraints that I talked about. Secondly, I want to note, because they're low traffic generators, because there's not a lot of people in and out of the facility regularly, the parking requirements for many storage facilities are low as well. And so what that allows is you can create more of an urban feel, and I hesitate to use the term urban, but you can create a multi-story facility that's brick on the outside, has more of an appearance of a more intense use, and you don't have to worry about the parking constraints that would go along with that if it were an office or something along those lines. And so ironically, the mini storage use kind of allows us to pay homage to some of the recommendations of the Cary Community Plan as it relates to look and feel, but also recognizes the significant site constraints associated with the property. And you know, this is a critical entry to the town. I mean, that's something that the town council is looking for, and so we believe that having kind of a multi-story building, and I think it's 70, a multi-story building constructed on the site that has limited parking will be a nice feature as folks enter into the town of Cary, certainly as compared to, you know, the existing use, but the other alternatives that could be parked and built on the site. So in sum, ironically enough, mini storage kind of feels like the best use for this property. I don't know if there's a lot of cases that I work on where if you look at the site and the recommendations of the Cary Community Plan, I can tell you this is the best use. I can't think of a better use that could go on this site, given the fact it's on a heavily traveled thoroughfare with limited access. And so with that, our team is here to answer any questions that you all might have, and we respectfully request you all's recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone here to speak on behalf of this particular rezoning case in the public hearing? I believe we have someone coming down.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tommy Drake. My company is Drake Commercial Properties, 3700 Computer Drive in Raleigh, and I come before you. I represent the Mann family, and the Mann family owns the 3.99 acres that lies between the applicant's property and the Swift Creek Elementary School. And the Mann family asked me to speak. They support this rezoning request. The applicant and their folks have been very open to dialogue and working together, and so we are grateful for their approach to working with the Manns. The Manns, that's their home place on that 3.99 acres. They've been there a long time, and they support this rezoning endeavor. So as the next door neighbor, that's to me quite an endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak? Was there someone who would? Nope. Okay. I don't see anyone else, so the public hearing's closed. And we will start with our questions. We'll go from left to right.
No questions.
No?
I may have missed it, Mr. Levin. How high can this multi-story mini storage building be? Is there a
There's
height
a
restriction?
default height limit of 35 feet within 100 feet of residential property line. That can increase by a foot with every foot that you add to the setbacks, but for a little over 2 acre site, they're going to start to run out of room if they get much higher than 35 feet.
So it looks like it's a 35-foot high building. Okay, good, thanks. And many mini storage facilities often have the big fences and gates and things like that around them. Is this also going to include, that kind of fencing around the property as you traditionally see?
It would be allowed to. At this point in the rezoning, we don't know if they'll propose it or
We don't
no.
know. And that's not a requirement, that's Just an
It's
unknown.
not a requirement that I'm aware of.
An unknown at this
I think that's something that they're typically motivated to provide.
Got it. And we have no understanding of whether or not this site would allow parking of boats or trailers or things like that on the ground adjacent with it? You know, is that, so that
That's
could happen?
outdoor storage that would not be allowed.
So it would not be allowed? Okay, thank you very much.
I have no questions.
I have a really dumb question. So, one of these we got, it said that there was a condition that no one would live in a unit. And I was wondering why there's no such condition in this one.
Well, zoning would prohibit it. I think they also have conditions. I can let the applicant answer that, but I think, again, they're motivated to also regulate that. That's not something I'm sure that
I've
the
wondered
applicant
why it was in the
desires
prior
either.
one.
It would be something that would be enforceable through zoning if that evidence came to light. I would imagine the applicant would probably enforce that.
Well, we all let our imaginations run away with that for a few minutes. I'll move over to Steve.
Comic relief.
I can't follow him, so I'm going to have to say no questions.
I have no questions, smart or dumb, at this point.
I don't have any questions.
Then would someone have a motion if there are no more questions of staff or applicant?
I'll make a motion, making a motion to approve 17 REZ 32. I move that the board approve this case number 17 REZ 32 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion on the motion? Anything particular? Or?
I think it is, I like the fact that it's limited in the use and it creates a transition, you know, in that area. It seems to be a good fit there, so.
I just think it makes sense there. I agree with Mr. Barrett.
Excellent. Anything else? Would all those in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries 8-0. That is unanimous. We have concluded our public hearings. We have one rezoning case and then one land development ordinance amendment that do not have public hearings. We operate the beginning of these the same way. Applicant, or staff first, then applicant, only we skip the public hearing part and we go right to talking about it. So we will take our first non-public hearing case of 17 REZ 31. Good evening, Ms. Granton.
Good evening. This is a rezoning request to expand the Glen Eyre Continuing Care Retirement Community, rezoning case 17 REZ 31. The subject property is located south of West Cornwall Road and west of Kildare Farm Road. It's a portion of the Mayfair Plaza Shopping Center. This zoomed-in view shows you how the proposed rezoning would take over what is now the Carolina Pottery site, some vacant property to the north of that, and then some land back behind the Carolina Pottery site. It does not include 2 out parcels and does not include the portion of the Mayfair Plaza Shopping Center where the Food Lion grocery store is located. There's a yoga studio and then a few other retail uses and a bank use on the property. So it's just the area shown in yellow. Here's a view of the Mayfair Shopping Center, Mayfair Plaza Shopping Center. As you know, this property's been scrutinized over the years as looked at as an ideal place for redevelopment. A number of different ideas and suggestions about what would be a good fit here. Right now, the zoning is a combination of MXD, general commercial, and general commercial conditional use. So we had retail where the Carolina Pottery is located. There was a previous rezoning case for MXD for senior living up at the corner, the area shown in blue, and then an area designated for parking where the general commercial conditional use was located. The applicant's proposing to convert the entire zoning of this area to MXD. So again, it's the mixed use district, but it is a single use. But MXD is the appropriate zoning to apply for when they want that flexible zoning district. In this case, a preliminary development plan for the retirement community expansion. The growth framework map identifies the property as being within a commercial center mixed use. And this is the preliminary development plan, which must accompany that MXD designation. So what is proposed is a maximum 80-foot building height, a proposed modification to town standards where sidewalk would just be proposed along one side of an internal street to the site. The applicant is proposing not to have a vehicular connection to Rose Street, but to have just a pedestrian connection to Rose Street. So these are some modifications to development standards that are proposed as part of this development. And what is proposed with the site is a senior living facility, which is 192 independent living rooms, 40 assisted living facilities, and then 25 daycare use. So daycare would be open to residents and then would also be open to 25 people who are not residents. The site is impacted slightly by a stream buffer according to our most recent GIS maps, and field determination of those features would be required at the time of development plan. This shows you that the property is located adjacent to Kildare Farm Road, which is a thoroughfare, and West Cornwall Road, which is also a major collector avenue. And there is an existing transit route, a Go Cary fixed route, located along the property frontage. This shows you the location of the Rose Street Park, which is a public park at the end of Rose Street, and it is located on both sides of the street. Again, as I mentioned, the applicant is proposing not to make a vehicular connection to that park. This is something that was discussed with our Parks and Recreation Department. It was also discussed with emergency service providers. And fire and police stated that they could serve the residents of the Montrose subdivision directly behind the property, that there's multiple access points and roads that they could get to this easily. And so that connection to Rose Street Park was not something that was mandatory for public safety. They could still reach those citizens. But this would help the park be able to consider redevelopment opportunities in the future without having that cut through traffic. There was some consideration from adjacent property owners about how this was going to look and how it was going to feel. So the applicant provided this sketch to give you an idea of the massing and how it would be in relation both to the park site and to adjacent residential uses in the vicinity. At the neighborhood meeting, which took place in January, neighbors expressed concern about height, the connection to Rose Street Park, and had questions about development regulations. Staff has also received several phone calls, mainly in support of the request. There was one citizen who expressed concerns about use. There was one citizen with questions about traffic, and then there were concerns expressed about stormwater. And the applicant has been meeting with the applicants to address the stormwater concerns. We've not heard anything since then. At the town council meeting in May, there was strong support for this request. There were multiple speakers who spoke about the need for this facility. And then there was one citizen who had concerns about parking. The aerial view made it look as though there was a significant parking reduction, but there's actually structured parking proposed below the buildings. So there's no modifications proposed to the parking standards. In our preliminary analysis of the Cary Community Plan, staff looked at the Live chapter, recognized that this does provide housing options, supported residential infill and redevelopment, but we questioned, was this the most intense use at a strategic location? Could it be a higher density? This is about 19 or 20 dwelling units per acre. Couldn't this area support more? With the Shape chapter, it calls for a revitalization at targeted redevelopment corridors and talks about appropriate transitions. And our early observations was that it did meet those policies. But as we analyze this further, and as you may have noted in the staff report, with this commercial mixed-use center, urban design is limited. The buildings aren't pulled up really close to the street. It's more of a suburban feel with traditional streetscapes. And it doesn't fully preserve this as an employment site. There would be opportunities for some employment, but not like you would find with an office building. Similarly, you wouldn't find employment opportunities if the this were a multifamily development either. So redevelopment potential for the Mayfair Plaza Shopping Center is uncertain. We don't know exactly how that's going to develop. Is this going to help the Mayfair Plaza Shopping Center, or is it going to hinder it? And you can argue it both ways. Sure, if you had 192 multifamily apartments where people were not getting meals and services, then the restaurants and the grocery stores would probably do better. But on the other hand, you're going to have visitors coming to this. You're going to have family members. And not everybody does all their shopping internally to the site. There's going to be things that they want to purchase. And they could walk to a grocery store. They could walk to restaurants. So there definitely were arguments both ways. The housing is limited to seniors. So it doesn't really expand housing for all age groups. But housing for seniors is in high demand. So we looked at all of those as we made our evaluation. Ultimately, staff did find that the rezoning was consistent with the Imagine Cary community plan. We looked at a balance of all the policies and put the greatest emphasis on the live chapter and the need for senior housing. So with that in mind, staff has a recommendation for approval. And this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is present, and then I'll be available for any questions.
Excellent, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and board members. My name is Tim Webster. I'm the president of the Presbyterian Homes, and Glen Air happens to be one of our continuing care retirement communities that we own, manage, and have developed in North Carolina. I have with me this evening Bill Steele, the architect with the Steele Group out of Winston-Salem, Dan Miller with Withers and Ravenel, civil engineer right here in Cary, and Glenda Topp with Glenda Topp and Associates in Raleigh. Glen Air is a continuing care retirement community right here, and we must say we have been a very proud corporate citizen of Cary over the past 25 years. In looking at Glen Air, Deborah, you did a great job as always in describing our project, and we appreciate the planning staff in working with us over the years, not only on this project, but 25 years. As I said, we're very pleased to be here in Cary and be a member of the community. But let me tell you a little bit about Glen Air. Glen Air is a not-for-profit, nationally accredited continuing care retirement community affiliated with the Presbyterian Homes. As I mentioned, we've been in Cary for 25 years. We're not developers, and I know you're probably going to disagree with me. Why'd we just put this up here? But we're really operators. We're managers of retirement communities. When we do build, we don't go away. We've been here for 25 years. We plan on being here for the next 25 years. Glen Air is very blessed. We've been very successful. We've grown over the years. We now serve 425 residents. We've created 285 jobs. We have close to 500 households on a waiting list to come to Glen Air. The wait list to get into Glen Air is now somewhere between 10 to 12 years. This is probably inappropriate, but there's a couple of you, if you're not on the wait list, you probably ought to come see us. But anyway, that wait list time is getting higher all the time. It's imperative that we expand our mission to serve people who want to live at Glen Air and live in Cary. We have worked hard to earn a good reputation. We believe we've been good neighbors and good corporate citizens of Cary. This rezoning is a case in point. We have been very open and transparent in the zoning process. We held our required neighborhood meeting, but in addition, we reached out to property owners who attended that meeting to follow up and see if they had any additional questions. Of primary concern was the Rose Street Park and those people that live up against it. they did not want connectivity vehicular. They wanted pedestrian only because they felt it would inhibit their privacy that they enjoy now. These neighbors interacted with the architect, civil engineer, and had their questions answered. We all agreed it was a very productive meeting. We believe this project is good for our neighborhood and good for Cary. We feel strongly that our expansion is in the right use of the property and serves an important population. Cary's community plan identifies a need for senior housing. This rezoning provides Cary with additional senior housing in a location that follows the guidelines outlined in that plan. The location is adjacent to an established shopping center, which the residents can walk to. Glen Eyre residents are active. They shop, they buy groceries, they go out to eat, they use medical services in the community. The new residents will help to support retail and other commercial uses within the Mayfair Commercial Center. The project is designed on purpose to embrace the rest of the center and will be well positioned if and when future development occurs. We feel like this development is going to be a catalyst for redevelopment, which it needs. The town has wisely invested a lot of money in a newly resurgent downtown, which our future residents will utilize, and they're enjoying already. Our current residents, our new residents will also shop and eat in downtown Cary. They will also utilize the new town park, and they will utilize the new regional library. The residents will have access to transit, both public and private. I'd like to make a couple comments about the Cary community plan. And I think there's some more areas other than that were pointed out in which we address in this. It was mentioned live, will be in keeping with the neighborhood. And I think we've proved that in our 25 years of living right in that neighborhood. We will provide housing choices. These housing choices will be different from what we offer right now. And it does provide a lot of infill, 192 apartments in this area. The work area of the community plan, we'll be adding a number of additional jobs, and we'll be helping to maintain our business and our mission to continue to be a good Cary corporate citizen. The shop area, will be improving a shopping area, a retail area. I think will be a catalyst for future improvements. And then engage, experiencing the Cary community. Rose Park will be in our backyard, and we have a real interest. And this is going to be negative towards the town of Cary, but Rose Park does not meet the town of Cary parks. I've been to several, and that's one park that we together, and I say together, can improve because it's a small park. But a lot of times small places can be very special to people, and we think we can work with the town to improve Rose Park. Also, our residents enjoy all the parks in Cary, so we think we're going to add to that. As far as the shape area, I think we could be a catalyst. I've mentioned about 3 or 4 times. I like to repeat myself, but I think we can be a catalyst for this area being redeveloped. And then move. We embrace sidewalks. We embrace walking, riding bikes. This development has a through connection to the Mayfair Plaza, so we think we'll add there. And then as I mentioned, we're adding senior housing, and the plan says that Cary needs additional senior housing. So I hope you'll support a project for many reasons. The need for senior housing is stated in the Cary community plan. This project is highly compatible with the surrounding neighborhood, and it fits within the guidelines outlined in the Cary community plan. This project creates a potential outcome that is beneficial for the existing and future residents of Cary and the community at large. I appreciate your consideration, and I'd appreciate your support, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions of Ms. Grannon or of our applicant, we'll start on the right and just go from there.
I do not have any questions.
Mr. Granite, just one question on the entrance coming off of Kildare Farm Road. That's, the existing entrance is going to be somewhat relocated, or it's going to be shifted to the north?
Shifted,
So it's going to be shifted to
yeah.
the north and?
The
okay.
preliminary development plan, which shows that there would be just one entrance coming into the site.
Okay. And just, I'm looking at the preliminary site plan that was attached, and the area around Rose Street Park, I see that there's going to be some fencing, but there will be more formal connectivity. I mean, I think the sidewalks that are going to go into that park. But right now, there's not really any connectivity.
Rose Street Park is not part of the proposal.
But I'm
so-
just looking at from the drawing. Yes, but I'm just looking at the sidewalks that are laid out in that.
The sidewalk would just go up to the edge
to-
of the property.
Okay.
Yeah, so
All
there's
right.
nothing proposed at
But
this
for the
time for
park.
the park.
Right, so it's better than the hole in the fence that's there now.
Yeah, there might be something in the future, but there's nothing that's a zoning condition that addresses the park at this time.
I understand. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Okay.
Anything, Steve?
Not a question, just a curiosity. The buffer that'll be between Glen and the shopping center, what is that gonna be? Is that gonna be just, is that plants? Is it?
Basically an
Structures.
aesthetic buffer, so that the uses stay integrated, landscaping through this area. Mhm.
That's all.
Well, I'm going to follow up on that. I assume the shopping center is going to just get sawed in half. Can Food Line go right to the property line and just keep that building like right up to the end?
Yes,
so-
this
so the-
is the yoga studio here, so this
So
is
the
the
buffer's
Food
going to
Line.
be absorbed completely by the Glen Air property?
Right, because the building goes right to the property line
Right to the
today.
property line, okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I need to know. Thanks.
No questions.
I don't have any questions.
Victor?
So oftentimes when we speak about housing for older folks, often there's something in the zoning conditions specifying that. Am I to understand that because we're designing this as a mixed-use development, someplace within all of that, we're hardwiring in that this is going to be
A
senior aging?
continuing care retirement community. Right.
Got it. So we don't have to be concerned this could be, some other generation or whatever like that. It's hardwired into the MXD specification
Right.
for it, as opposed to a condition per se.
Right.
Okay. And then on your drawing here, you might have one of the earlier ones that shows a little better, but to the far, this one's fine right here, but to the far left of the property where it kind of juts out into the neighborhood, in the middle of that little green area is that current, it's a.
Cell tower.
It's a
yes.
white one right now. It's kind of, doesn't look to be a cell tower, but I guess it's sort of disguised as a cell tower. That's going to go away,
No, that remains on the property.
so that will remain on the property and functioning as a cell tower. How high are the buildings then right along?
I will tell you.
The most adjacent to that, are they going to be 50, 60 feet?
Let's see, this is, in your staff report, there's a chart that identifies this as well. Building G is 7 stories, 6 above grade, or 80 feet. And building H, 3 stories, 34 feet. And building I, 7 stories, maximum of 80 feet.
And that cell tower is probably in the 50 to 60-foot range, I'm guessing. So it's probably going to be right out the window of people on the 5th, 6th, or 7th floor. So there's no consideration that's going to be removed, discontinued?
No.
It's built into the plan as Glen Air as.
It's existing, right.
It's existing. Okay, thank you. That's the only questions I have.
Maybe better for Mr. Webster, what's being proposed, is it going to be self-sufficient, or will the 192 independent people have to go back and forth to the current building or current setup?
It's planned that the two will use the communities to connect them. We really want them to share services and share amenities, so they will connect.
Okay, and then I guess they'd have to either drive or take the sidewalk up on Kildare to get there.
Or we will provide transportation. We may be providing a shuttle back and forth.
Okay.
Yes. To the gentleman's question about the cell tower, I don't know the exact height of it. It's a company out of Florida. The agreement was done with the Carolina Pottery owner some years ago. I know the regs say it can go up to 110, 110 feet, whether it's 110 or not, I'm not sure, but we're aware of that. We just have to maintain it because there is a long-term lease on that property. Love for it to go away, but it's there. We'll live with it.
Is that it? That's it. Anyone have a motion in mind?
I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 17 REZ 31 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and it is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Someone have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion you want to give us?
Cary, we've been talking about affordable and senior housing for a while now, and I think this is a great space for it. I think that 25 years in this area really gives them credibility as their abilities to have this type of housing. I just think it makes sense.
Anything to add?
Yeah, it certainly checks the box as an option for senior housing, and as well as housing in general for creating space for work. I think a lot of the boxes are within the plan. I appreciate the comments from the staff about could there be more intense use? Yes. Could it be more of an urban feel? Yes. But I think this is a good step in that direction, because I think if we went all the way there so quickly, people couldn't appreciate it. I mean, for those of us who lived here a long time, it's going to be a shock enough to see a 6-story building there. But I think it also is the right sort of development there, because I think of that north end of Kildare Farm really also being the gateway to what we've been doing on Academy, and with the art center, the public library, the park, et cetera. It really is part of that gateway. So I think some of that buffer they have along Kildare is the right thing. And I think there's a lot of pluses. I think the applicant has demonstrated over 25 years that they are a good neighbor. They develop and they maintain what they have. I see some positive in terms of helping to support the shopping center there, even though folks may be getting most of their meals, there'll still be incidentals and things like that they're going to be buying. That Food Line and the Family Dollar store that's next, or whatever that is next door there, et cetera. But in that shopping center, whoever the tenant is an opportunity there. So yeah, that's why.
Any other comments on this motion?
And I'd just like to say that I think it's an excellent proposal, and the consistency with the live provisions of the plan seem to be the ones that stand out. And this is a case where we've got all sorts of competing considerations in the plan, but one stands out as being very applicable, and I think the live provision is good. And also the demand, there's no question about the demand for this kind of use. Just no question at all. The stories about the 8 and 10 year waiting list I know to be true, and not that I've applied.
Better get on.
I know to be true, and so I think it's a very good use.
Anyone else?
Just one other thing. I think this too this case is different from the previous one, because when we're talking about the apartments, to me, the location here, the mission, and what it's doing, I think really sets it differently than what we talked about with the apartments. And I do think it's important to mention that. And I think really, because just what it does, I know it's not an infield development as such, but it is gonna improve the character of that area. Mm-hmm. So I do see it as differently than the previous case.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, at the risk of sounding redundant, I support it for the same reasons. I think Glen Eyre has demonstrated their long-term commitment to the community. On a personal note, my parents lived there for over 20 years and actually owned a store in downtown Cary, and my mom walked down there from the neighborhood every day to work, so I can validate that the residents are active enough to enjoy and engage with the town in terms of the burgeoning downtown amenities. So all that's good, but also the fact that, to have them work with the neighborhood voluntarily to try to figure out how they can enhance the little park that's behind there in an older neighborhood that I'm sure felt some trepidation about seeing some large buildings growing up in their backyards. But all that, I think, speaks well to their interest in continuing their support of the community.
Anyone else? Then would all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Say no, please. That motion is again unanimous.
Thank you.
We are to our last, thank you, Ms. Graham, for sticking with us this late. We are to our last one, and well, I'm thanking Ms. Grennan. Thank you for waiting all night to come and just bring us this last case. Ms. Bierman's here to talk about LDO ordinance amendments.
Thank you. Before you tonight are the Act 5 amendments to the Land Development Ordinance and the Town Code. Act 5 reflects changes in how we evaluate and make decisions on development-related issues since the Imagine Cary Community Plan was adopted in January of last year. And these amendments were discussed at your work session last Monday on June 18th. So before Imagine Cary, our land use plan or our comprehensive plan was map-based. The analysis focused largely on basic questions of land use and density. There were frequent amendments to the plan, and there was no staff recommendation at that time. By comparison, the Imagine Cary Community Plan is policy-based, and the analysis for rezoning cases now and ordinance amendments are based on 68 policies, including a future growth framework map. The plan is more flexible now, and it's not amended on a lot-by-lot basis because of that flexibility. And now staff does provide recommendations as the cases move forward. Town Council had a retreat last February, and that included the discussion of 3 distinct roles in the planning process. First was staff, which really conducts a technical analysis and looking through and having an evaluation of applicable policies, much as you've heard through a number of the cases tonight. Then the Planning and Zoning Board's emphasis is on consistency of the request with the Cary Community Plan, which is based in the statutory requirements for the board. And then finally, council receives inputs and makes decisions based on what is reasonable and in the public interest. So during the discussion at the council retreat, we received direction to look at possible changes to the current regulations to look at these 4 specific areas. So that's what we're bringing before you tonight. The first change emphasizes the statutory role of planning and zoning boards in North Carolina, and this would focus your evaluation and your vote on the policy considerations of the plan rather than on approval or denial of a specific rezoning request. The second proposed change is to eliminate public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Board, and this will help clarify your role to citizens as well. Council is seeking your perspective as individual citizens through your board's deliberation and discussion on different issues, as opposed to trying to represent any viewpoint of a neighborhood or larger community, and that by eliminating the public hearings, we hope to make that more clear. The third change is for the ETJ member to vote only on those cases that are in the ETJ, which is the basic requirement of the general statutes. And this would include voting on all LDO text amendments, since those changes potentially affect all property within our planning jurisdiction. And the final change would be to the number of planning board members. General statutes require a minimum of 3 members. We did survey a number of cities and towns across the state and found numbers of members ranging from 5 to 10. And we did note that the number was not directly related to the size of the jurisdiction, so it's very unique to each municipality. We felt that the number 7 aligns with the number of council members we have, and also could allow more time for individual members to share viewpoints and have an even deeper discussion of issues and perspectives during your deliberations. So this concludes staff's presentation. Following your discussion, when you're ready to vote on this case, you will need to vote separately on the LDO amendments and the amendments shown, the amendments in the town code, just a technical clarification there as shown here on this slide. And in addition, you may also vote separately on each of those 4 items if that's your desire. So that concludes my comments.
Thank you. Before we begin, I guess we'll start with that very question. Do we want to break all 4 of these out? Do you want to group some of them? You just want to speak in general about the whole idea and then later separate things out? How would you like to go about it?
I'd like to do them separately. That's just me talking. I think they're distinct. If I don't feel right lumping them all together, you know, if I may support 75% of them, and I'd hate to know that I have to vote one way or the other because of the 25% maybe that I don't. So anyway, that's just my feeling.
All right.
Because I like to see them separate.
Everyone okay with that idea?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
We would suggest at least 2 motions. There are LDO amendments, and Mary's got it outlined on the slide. The LDO amendments have to do with plan consistency in the public hearing, so we'd ask that that be 1 vote or 2 if you want to separate it, and that you have a separate vote on the Code of Ordinance amendments, and the changes that are reflected there are the changes to the ETJ member duties and to the number of board members. So at least 2 votes, and
Sure.
if you feel the need to break it up further than that, that'd be fine as well.
Great, fair enough. Thank you very much. So, you want to just start with number 1, board votes only on plan consistency? We'll start over here.
This one I think makes sense, because that's technically what we're doing anyway. I think that it's been a misconception to some that, especially in the public's eyes, that we are voting to or have power to vote for something to be approved or denied. I think that is strictly for the town council to decide, and we are the citizens' voice. So to change that, that we're only voting on plain consistency makes sense to me.
I don't have any questions or comments on that one.
I don't either. I support that.
I support that. I have no problem with it.
I agree. I agree with Sherry's comments.
Okay.
I think the Planning and Zoning Board, it could serve in a much better role as being the guardians, like we talked about last week, of the plan. I think they're probably best positioned to really take that to heart and provide that consistency measure in the whole process. So if not Planning and Zoning on that one, who would? So I think that's well placed.
I agree. I'm on board.
Yeah, I'm very happy to see the motions, if this is approved, that we will no longer say, as it is reasonable and in the public interest. That's not our business, really, to be determining. And there have been many times where we have made a determination of whether something we believe to be reasonable and in the public interest, and that has been sort of in the way of council doing that, and that's really their job. They're the ones accountable to the people, not, they're more, I mean, they've got the ultimate accountability, and we really don't. So when we say something's, reasonable in the public interest, we bring these other things that are outside the community plan in, and I just think it gets in the way of council being able to do what they're supposed to be doing. So I endorse it as well. So that one went fairly easily, so if you would like, we could just dispense with that right now and make a motion on that one and put it to bed and then go to the next one. You want to do that?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can make a motion if you want. Do
Sure.
I just say I make a motion to approve that?
We have an LDO amendment
Okay.
section on here.
All right. I move that the board forward LDO amendment, Act 5 LDO. What is that? Is that right?
Let's call it 5-1.
5-1 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
For now.
That's funny. Sorry.
Use the old, sort of like an infinite loop there.
At least
That's
I
right.
can't wait for you to rewrite
Is there a
that.
second?
One more, I'll second it.
All right. Any other discussion on that motion? All in favor of adopting 5-1, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say no. We are done with the first one. We are on to public hearings. Let's start on this side.
have mixed feelings on this one, and I think a lot of it's just my inexperience on the board. I totally understand why it would make sense to not have them for us, but in my short time on the board, the public will say something that never crossed my mind that I find interesting, and it does weigh into my thoughts. I'm confident in myself enough that I'm going to make my own decision, not based on what somebody else wants, but it's important to me to hear everything. Sometimes that does help.
Well, I think given where we're trying to go here, again, thinking about the centrality of the Town of Cary plan, we need to speak for the plan. So I think our input and our decisions should be informed by that plan. And actually, to some extent, maybe the public input can take us off into different directions that actually could be inconsistent with our being consistent with the plan, if you follow. So I actually think this is I think well-directed as a thought here. I think it has some bonus opportunities as well. I'll just share those because we talked about it during the work session last week. If we dispense with the Planning and Zoning Board having public hearings, we don't necessarily need to have the beautiful accommodations necessarily of this huge area because we wouldn't have that audience. We could probably conduct our meetings in a smaller conference room as some of our other boards and advisory groups here in the town of Cary could do. And it may even mitigate the need to have anything more than just the audio that we use in our work sessions to record things as video. And as I say all those things, that really could streamline a lot of processes, take some work out of things for the staff and other folks who need to attend these meetings. Someone that doesn't have to do a video and edit all of that. And I think when you finally get done with that kind of a format of a meeting, if that's where you want to go, I think that the difference between a work session and a planning and zoning regular session, as we've traditionally kept them separate in the past, really becomes not so different. And that may allow a consolidation of those two things in the past to a single meeting. And perhaps it's only 12 meetings a year, as opposed to the 2 meetings a month, 24 that we have right now with the work session. So there's a lot of cheese at the end of this tunnel, I think, that if you thought about the implication of public hearings, it could allow things to streamline quite a bit. And I think at the end of the day, our town council might benefit as well, rather than watching a 3-hour video. Every time we get up here and do our thing, they could read, a 2-page set of minutes and kind of get the story, short of maybe one town council representatives being there with us to hear it live. So anyway, I just wanted to riff on that. I think this can do a lot of things positive beyond just what's written here on this page.
I support the idea of doing away with public hearings, just because I think as part of our discussion last week reflected, we just are leading the public into expectation that by being heard by us, that it actually has an impact on the final outcome, which is really nothing more than our recommendation for the council to make its ultimate decision. So I think using the time to have them come before us can sometimes mislead them into thinking that we have more weight than we do in terms of the final outcome. So I think I'm in favor of dispensing with the public hearing.
I have no problem with dispensing with the public hearings. It's bifurcated now. Sometimes they're before the council, sometimes they're here. I think consolidating it in one place and doing it in the council, and I can pull up the video very easily and watch the public hearing, and probably be a little more comfortable than sitting here listening to a public hearing. So I really have no problem with it. I think it's a good move.
I tend to agree. I support the elimination of the public hearings. I agree with what's been said. I would only add, I view it as streamlining government and making it easier for people to work with the town. These folks having to come do this sometimes 3 times, I think that's a lot. So I think we can eliminate that. And I do want to add just one thing to what Victor was saying. If these meetings are becoming less, it might be worth looking. We don't have to decide, not proposing it here. I mean, it's up to you guys, but I could see the need the ability to merge the work sessions into the meetings. I'm thinking that probably would be a possibility. And then as far as location, that I'm not really concerned about, whatever works best.
I don't have a problem with eliminating public hearings before the P and Z. I think the public should be heard in front of the elected officials. And when the council moved a few years back, maybe several years ago, that they were going to have preliminary hearings before it went to P and Z, you know, because they wanted to hear it early, kind of test the waters and the temperature. And they've seen that they still have multiple hearings, the council will, and they'll even, if they don't think there's been enough public input, we saw a recent case recently, the council said, no, we want another community meeting to make sure all the voices are heard. So we have a council that makes sure that folks want to be heard, and they should be heard before council, not us. And I think some of the other issues in terms of streamlining, so.
I agree with the clarification bit with the public. We had a gentleman earlier this evening that mentioned that, I can't remember verbatim what he said, but it basically said that he thought that we could help him get this approved or denied or what have you. I think it was denied. But and specifically, whenever I spoke before the P&Z board last year, I was under the impression that your vote would sway the town council one way or the other. So from personal experience, I think eliminating the public hearings in front of the board makes perfect sense, and it brings clarity to the public on who is really responsible for making the final decision. So I do support it.
And I support it as well, especially because I think it goes hand in hand with what we just voted for. I don't mean to be flippant, I don't mean to be cavalier about this, but we've been described several times by council as a random group of people who just give the citizens input. And I don't mean to diminish that or anything. But let's face it, we are not professional planners. Our staff are the professional planners. We are not representatives of any particular constituency. Those people meet on Thursday nights, not here. So we are really just a citizen's perspective area. But for the longest time, we've been, by the way we do business, making it seem like we're much more than that. I mean, I've got this agenda with all these items people have to do for a public hearing. And if I would just start and say, hey, we're just a citizens board, we're not your representative, that would end that whole thing right then. But folks have come here, and they keep to their time limit, and they prepare documents and everything for us with almost a false hope that we have more clout than we really do. And for them to take that to council in the last section, I think is incredibly valuable. Council wants that. They want that responsibility. They want that face-to-face. The only thing I hope for is in the current situation we have now, when an item is on the discussion agenda with town council, it's presented by the staff. I speak or someone from P&Z speaks for a few minutes, and that's it. If the public wants to speak, they do it in the beginning in public speaks out. So if we're going to change and allow council to have that last public hearing, I think the applicant's got to be part of that as well, just like they are here with us. So I've never heard that mentioned, but I'm sure that gets put into the mix. But this, I think, just goes hand in hand with the consistency. The thing we just voted on with consistency with the plan makes our operation much more clear. Eliminating the public hearings makes it much more clear for the public as to where the rubber meets the road and where they need to focus their attention. And I really am, I look forward to that working so well going forward. Anything else? Motion time.
I'll make an effort at it. Well, I'm serious, and council may ask me to reword something, but let's see, under the LDO, I move that the board forward the LDO amendment 5, 1, and 2 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed. And do I need to restate 1 and 2? Okay.
Do we have a second for that?
I'll second it.
All right. You want to add any other discussion to that? No? No? All those in favor of 5.2, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That is also unanimous. We are now moving to town ordinance, and I believe the wording might be, would that be the same as the LDO? We don't have anything on our sheet, so we'll just use the LDO text. And let's talk about ETJ member votes only on ETJ items. And I'm going to go to our ETJ rep to lead us off.
Okay. So, to me, this doesn't make any sense. I think I made my perspective very clear during our work session, so I'll try to summarize it here. Everything that the town of Cary does affects some part of the ETJ, whether it be in Green Level or on the other side of Cary towards the Apex or Holly Springs or Mooresville. I specifically am 50 feet from the town of Cary. I look out my front yard and I can see the town of Cary. So for the town council to say that I can only assist with something that is in the ETJ is just, quite frankly, ridiculous in my opinion. I also bring a different perspective because, an example again, where I live, the town of Apex is building on one side of Green Level West Road. The town of Cary is building on the other side of Green Level West Road. And it's apparent that they're not talking. The two towns aren't speaking, because if they were, they'd recognize that it's being completely overdeveloped in that area. So I bring a different perspective than the rest of my board members here that I partner with. So I do believe that I have a lot of value to add to this board, and to limit me just to what specifically is in the ETJ is limiting your representation for your citizens. And eventually I will be in the town of Cary. I'm going to leave it at that.
Let's just go right down.
Yeah, I disagree with this strongly. I don't think that the ETJ members should vote just on ETJ cases. You know, we think of the ETJ being in the very western part, the Green Level area, and it's not. We have other areas, and I think that the ETJ member does bring a good perspective as to this, and whether it be they vote on all of them or ones that are at least in some proximity of those areas, but just to eliminate it, I think a good case made with, you know, it can be right up to your property line, but, you know, unless it's impacting it, not having a voice or at least being able to offer that, because particularly as we're moving to, you know, we're the keeper of the plans in a sense, so we're talking about the consistency, and I think it's important to have that voice if we're looking at, you know, at the plan, the intent of the consistency of the plan, to have that perspective of somebody from the ETJ, whether they live in a donut hole or whether they live in, you know, one of the greenfield areas left for development. It's important to know that and have that at the table as we consult.
I looked at this and I tried to take personality out of it, but because, you know, members come, members go, but I would also have to vote no to this, because I think it's just awkward to have someone on the board that gets up and leaves or can't vote. And again, I agree here, the perspective is going to be completely different possibly than mine, and it doesn't say I have to agree with it, but I think it's good to have it, and you know, I would like to see it continue as it is.
I would agree with what's said, and if it must be changed, it makes no sense not to at least have some extension. For instance, you could have an ETJ proposal and a proposal that comes right up to the ETJ line, which is within the town of Cary, not the ETJ, that's going to greatly impact the ETJ, and the ETJ member would have no say on it at all, and that doesn't seem to serve the purpose. It doesn't even seem to serve the purpose of the statute, which is to allow input for people who live in the ETJ to have some say. Since Cary is granted ETJ jurisdiction in order to protect its interest in growing and developing and what happens, and people in the ETJ need to have some input. It's a symbiotic relationship that needs to be maintained.
I agree with all the statements that have been made on this subject thus far.
Ms. Glover, can I ask you one council question on this whole topic? I come at this from a little different point of view here, but let me just make sure. I think I know the answer to this from our discussion and work session last week, but within the North Carolina statutes as they relate to planning and zoning boards, is there not a requirement that a planning and zoning board do its duties by voting.
You're required to make a written determination on plan consistency. The word voting is not in the statute.
Okay.
But I have a hard time seeing how you can make a determination without, in some way, voting.
Oozing towards an answer, okay. I just had the one question, so I don't want, you have to feel like you're obliged to keep standing, you can go back and sit down. In the spirit, again, of what we're trying to do, and Sherry made the comment up front, an individual comes and speaks to us, which maybe not be possible in the future, but, you know, people could sit in our new meetings because it's still public, and they could sit in the back room and listen to what we're saying, without even public speak out. And again, the fact that we go through a vote is another part of that indication of a false sense of authority. And I don't know that if this thing really takes it to its logical conclusion, that maybe we want to still encourage that kind of a mindset for the purposes of the community, seeing what we do. Again, we're the defenders of the plan. We're speaking for the plan. We're not speaking for the community or anybody else. We're speaking for the plan. And so, you know, whether votes continue or not, as it's worked out in the future here, it is clear that our votes, because we're not the authoritarian group that some people perceive us to be, you know, we've had situations where we voted unanimously against something, and even staff has said no to something, and town council, out of their jurisdiction, and it's appropriate, have said yes to it. So, I mean, you know, if there was somebody in the audience sitting here listening to us say no, they went home that night thinking that development's not going to come in next door to their home, but no, it changed. So it's, the voting process is really, as we've heard from town council and our representative, it's the discussion that we have is what they really want to hear. They want that input to factor into what they think ultimately. And whether we have a vote of 9 to 0 or 5 to 5 or something else, whatever it is, it's the discussion. So I'm going to use the word. Our vote is, you know, in that context, and then with regard to the consistency of the plan stuff, really sort of meaningless. It's not the numeric vote, although there is a question, how do you get to that consistency thing? But there could be other ways to do that, but certainly you need to have that deliverable. The vote is kind of meaningless. So now let me come to this topic right here. So we're going to say to the ETJ representative, whoever they may be on this board, and say, we don't want you to participate, we don't even want your discussion input on this particular item, because it doesn't relate to an ETJ, because we don't want you to vote on something that's within the town of Cary. But wait a minute, all the rest of our votes are, I use the word, kind of meaningless. It's the discussion that's important. So if we go to 7 people versus 9, to have someone there represent ETJ, that's discussion. Isn't it as valuable as anybody else's discussion? So I think this is kind of a, I can understand where this might have originated, and I'm not going to speculate on that, but you know, I think this is one that just, the other things are great on this page, but this one just bothers me, and I would be no for it.
I agree with most of what's been said. I wouldn't support it as it is.
I'm going to share something that our absent friend Ryan Eads said at our work session. Going forward, we are now going to decide whether or not, we are going to determine whether or not a particular application is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. We are not going to talk about whether something is reasonable and or in the public interest. One council member said at the hearing for this that he does not understand why someone who does not live in Cary has a voice in what happens downtown, or something like that. And in the context, I guess, of reasonable in the public interest, you might be able to make that. But as Ryan mentioned in our work session, if I am, or he is, to decide whether something is consistent with the Cary Community Plan or not, the fact that someone from an ETJ has made a few comments isn't going to change his determination. And I suppose most of us would be that way. It's a fairly objective determination we're going to be making. And I thought he captured that perfectly well, and I don't see how I could say that any better. So I'm not sure there's any. It doesn't sound like there's any support whatsoever for eliminating an ETJ member from here. Now, we have had this is me speaking now, no longer Ryan. we've had this kind of misnomer with the public where they think, we sort of represent them, 19 people out of 20 come to a public hearing and say one thing, and then we go the other way. They go, hey, you didn't represent us. I could see where someone might say there's only one person on this board who actually represents a particular constituency, but really they don't. They just happen to fill a slot assigned to a particular constituency. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you don't feel obligated to have to represent the ETJ against the wishes of the town at large or anything, is that?
No. I vote with my conscience and the consistency of the plan. It just so happens I live in the ETJ.
Yeah. And I would submit that there are people who, by nature of who they work for, have greater internal problems with, do I represent a constituency or not, than by where they live. But that's a whole other thing. So I don't think there's, I'll just say, I don't think, it doesn't sound like there's any support here on this at all. So I'm not going to belabor it anymore. I'm going to get to a vote and make it known whether that's the case.
I'll make the motion.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
I move that the board forward case number Act 5 LDO, Lisa, I'm sorry.
That would be the town.
Town Code of Ordinances, number 1, to Town Council with a recommendation for denial as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and denial is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second to that? I'm
Did you
sorry.
mean to say it was consistent with the plan, or?
I just read from the
plan.
script here,
Oh.
so it's not consistent.
You always have a choice there with that phrase.
Okay, it's not consistent. Do I need to read it all again? Okay.
I don't believe so. Not consistent and denial. That's where we
Denial.
are. Second on that, someone?
I'll second.
I don't think there's any other
I
discussion
don't think
necessary,
you
is
want
there?
me to talk anymore.
All right, all those in favor of denial and inconsistent with the plan, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. All right, we've got that one handled. We now move to Town Ordinance 2. The number of planning and zoning members changed from 9 to 7, and I'm going to ask that we don't worry too much about how that happens, whether it's, with the rotation of the different things, but just the number going from 9 to 7. I don't know if we want to get caught up in the weeds of how that's actually implemented. I'm starting over here this time, right?
No real great comments. It makes sense to me. It lines up with how council sits.
No comment.
I would be opposed to that, because I think having more voices, particularly since we're not voting and you're relying, or council is relying on the comments and the opinions or the thoughts of this board relating to the consistency and all the other elements that they've asked us to do, would just be more input for them to make an informed decision.
Yeah, I would think that this board has operated for many, many years with 9 members. I've never been aware of any particular problems that having the number 9 presented in the way that the board was administered or anything. The town's grown, it's gotten bigger. You can make an argument just as well for 11 as you can for 7. It just seems that 9 has functioned well, and I really have tried to come up with a rationale for why 7 would be better than 9, and I have not been able to come up with anything. Now, maybe somebody can explain a rationale to me that I haven't thought of, but it certainly has eluded me, and I think we ought to stick with 9.
I thought about this one a lot, and I'm just going to accept, because I hear what you're saying. I'm just going to go with that if the council feels that it should be a 1-to-1 match to them, I'm fine with that. So I would actually support this.
I've thought about this, trying to think of what the problem is that we're trying to solve with this, and I can't think of what that problem is. I mean, as a member of this board for 3 years now, I've never once have thought that the number of people sitting at this table prevented me from, being able to either ask questions or to voice an opinion on any of the cases coming before us rather. And I think that given the plan and the nuances of the plan that we have, and I think also the complexity, I think the council would want kind of the richness of the various ideas and thoughts and opinions that would come from it. The other part that gives me great heartburn is that if the previous item that we talked about was to stand as was being proposed, that the ETJ member only votes on ETJ cases, those cases are going to be fewer and fewer. So effectively, you're down to 6 people who vote, and so we've just eliminated, we reduced the citizen input by 1/3. And I think that is, I don't think that's going in the right direction. I don't think that's meant to be, but that's where we would be going. So I can't support reducing it. I just don't see a need in aligning it because the number of people, I mean, so the teen council should just have 7 people instead of what they have, several hundred, if you follow that logic, all the way down the road for every council. I don't think it makes sense.
We are a group of 9 professionals, and the perspectives that we have are very different based on the parts of Cary, how long that we lived here, just different experiences in the town of Cary or in the ETJ. I think that changing the number, it doesn't really make sense. It limits the input, which is so valuable according to the town council. I don't know why they would want to lower that number. If anything, I would think that they will want to increase it because that's more perspectives, that's more opinions, that's more for them to consider whenever they're making their decisions for the citizens of Cary. So I don't really support this.
As for me, I guess I go back to my own military background. Sometimes you just salute that general and say, yes, sir. And I don't have a compelling reason to argue against it. So in this case, they got elected to council, and there's some things they just get to do because they got elected to council. And if they have a reason, whatever that may be, to go from 9 to 7, I pray to God it's not a short-term fix of any kind. But if they have a reason to go from 9 to 7, who am I to? I don't have any compelling reason to argue against that. And they are the council, and I've got no. I just roll with it. I guess is how I'll look at that. It's one of all the things that you can just deal with. I think that's the easiest to just deal with.
I'd love to know the reason now. I'm with Chuck.
I think, I don't know, they had expressed that it's alignment with the council, 7 to 7. And honestly, they did show that, and we saw earlier from Spearman, we're one of the higher numbers of other towns. I mean, most towns have a lower number than us, so. Who be it for me? Anyone else?
If we were being paid, I would use that as a rationale that we could save the citizens money. This is voluntary. We don't get a penny out of it. I don't see a rationale for it.
Or we could divide it 7 ways instead of 9 ways. Then you wouldn't have to live in that storage facility.
That's right. That's right. And to the town council, I would say, sir, may I speak candidly?
So does anyone have a motion one way or the other? And
I would
sounds
make
like
a
we might
motion,
have
but I
2
don't know if
motions here.
I don't know if it'll pass.
Let's give it a go.
But I'm willing to do it just to see what happens. So I moved that the board forward, it says town code amendment, correct? Okay, and can I call it 5.2? Is that, okay, 5.2 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Approval. Does anyone have a second?
A second.
Any further discussion, or can we go right to the vote on this? All those in favor of approval, please say aye. And your hand. Aye. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed, hand in no. We are tied at 4-4. Does that necessitate another tied motion for denial at 4-4, or are we good to go?
No, I think we'll leave it and we'll put some notations
We'll
on
just
your written
annotate that.
determination.
All right, so that takes us through our other items on the agenda. There is a new business item. Mr. Varney has asked for a moment of the floor, and
Sure,
there's
thank
no
you.
objection. We'll hand it to you.
Where's Ryan?
Given the expectation of our team going from 9 to 7, in our discussion last week at the work session, which would probably most likely be managed by the upcoming three of us who are expiring terms at the end of September, which would arithmetically mean only one of those three could have a chance to even return. I've decided that I'm going to resign my position from the board. I'm going to resign it effective September 30th, so I still would be available to serve on meetings until that time, but that would allow the town staff to go ahead and make decisions about other applicants or any of you that might want to consider extending your stay as well. And if there should be a decision to go to 9 to 7 sooner, I'm happy to step down at that time. So.
Do we get to vote on that? Vote against?
Your vote's meaningless, it doesn't matter. It's already been decided.
Well, that may be true of other votes.
Well, that makes me sad.
So, yeah, you'll be missed, Victor. Do we have any other new/old business? Otherwise, there's only one motion left.
Make a motion to dismiss?
Or adjourn, take your.
Adjourn.
Second on that, please.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and thank you to the staff for sticking with us this late.
How did I get dismissed? It's 10 o'clock.
Yeah, so let's go.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.